And we're back. Hello,
Welcome.
Phil and Matthew Booth. How are you
Hey.
both doing tonight?
Very well, thank you. Are you two all raring to go?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yes,
It's a nice,
yes.
cozy. I was going to say it's a nice, cozy, like dark, cold night, but for some reason, on the 29th of October, it decides to be 70 degrees in Britain,
Oh,
which is, what is that, like 17 degrees for those who don't listen, go by Fahrenheit.
oh boy, oh boy. Because over here it's perfect. It's foggy. It's a
Is it?
dark, foggy night.
Nice.
Well,
Very nice.
here
Over
it's doing
here
what
in-
Manchester always does, and it's raining. So
Yes.
it's fairly Halloweenish.
Yeah, both of us are
Right.
in theme, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I'd say weather-wise, it has been up until these last couple of days where it's been warm. We've had some pretty spectacular storms that have been very, in fit with what we're going to discuss tonight. The sort of Halloween monsters,
oh yeah,
universal monsters.
absolutely.
I woke up one morning, I think it was like last Saturday, and it was thunder and lightning, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna watch the Frankenstein movies now because it seems like the perfect time to do that. So 5 o'clock in the morning, while it's still dark, there's a lot of lightning. I put these things on and
Hey,
enjoyed my morning.
that
Doing,
rules, dude.
that
That's like
does.
one of the best moments to watch that. Yeah, you got a fireplace. You put some logs on the fire. Fire, no.
I mean, we got a fireplace, but we don't put it on. We don't put it on. But there's a few people in the chat, so hello to the people in the chat. If you
People in the
can,
chat.
smash that like button before we get started. But tonight, I'm really excited about this. We're going to be
Me too.
discussing the Universal monsters. I have been a huge fan of the Universal monsters, particularly the Frankenstein franchise, since I was a little kid. I remember vividly around October, November time, they were just always on television in the States.
Nice.
They were always on. I think it was AMC. They would always, play the old movies and do the build up to to Halloween. So I remember just sitting there watching them as often as I could, or renting them from the library on VHS because that's the era that I grew up in.
That's it.
But there was just something about the Universal monsters that just, from a young age, really gripped me, and have always done. But yeah, tell me, Matt and Phil, what's your sort of experience and you kind of the nostalgia feelings, I suppose, towards this franchise?
Matt, you can do the honors.
Well, yeah, for me, it's. I mean, I came to the Universal through Hammer. I was a Hammer
oh,
fan before, and I'd always been aware that there were Draculas and Frankensteins before Christopher Lee, and before Peter Cushing, but they were the ones that really sort of got me on the horror road, if you like. And it was a mix of that and the old Basil Rathbone Holmes films, which were made by the same studio and used a lot of the same sets, certainly the same music, and very often the same cast.
Yes.
So I remember a bit like you, Luke. I remember cold winter evenings, cold autumnal evenings, in bed with the lights off, watching them at sort of 10, 11 at night when they were just shown as one after the other, two or three after the other, after everyone else had gone to bed, and I'm thinking these are great.
Yes.
These are really good, and something they've got something that I think a lot of films since lack, and that is a massive amount of charm.
Yes.
It's just a real sense of sort of fun about them, despite their darker moments.
Yes.
There's something really comforting about them,
Yes.
And that's what I suppose it's the nostalgia for me, but it's memories of those dark nights, discovering what really were the originals that kickstarted the films that I already loved, and I came to the books, the Dracula and Frankenstein books from Hammer and Universal, and I won't pretend otherwise.
Yes. Yeah. No. Same. Absolutely. Yeah, it was definitely
Totes.
definitely those movies that got me interested, and eventually got me to read the books. There was just something about them. I even did under a different name in a different life, a comic book that's smashed Frankenstein with a very famous detective, the world's most famous detective, they might say. And that was an homage to my love for the Hammer horror stuff, but also the Universal Monsters rendition, but also Mary Shelley, because I just I kind of try to honor a little bit of everything in this very snappy 20-31 page comic book that is still out there. People want to buy it and find out what that's about.
Well,
Hello, Wahab. Wahab is in the chat. Greetings, Wahab. What was so shocking? Go on.
So I was just going to say, following on from that, a few people have done Holmes versus Dracula.
Yes, Lauren Estelman.
Lauren Estelman. My old friend David Stewart Davis did a book called Tangled Skein, which is Holmes versus Dracula.
Yes, yes.
And I think there was a radio play of the Estelman.
Yes, there was. Yes.
John Moffat and Timothy West, I think it is, as Holmes and Watson.
Possibly. I can't remember who.
Yeah, I mean, Holmes versus Dracula is a common thing.
Yes.
And to so is Holmes versus Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes, that's actually a really good book. That's the first pastiche I ever read, was Estelman's
No kidding.
Mr. Holmes and Dr. Jekyll or whatever. Great.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. It's really good.
Yes. I was surprised by how good it was. I thought, oh, this sounds fun, but could be cheesy, and I was hooked. Somewhere deep in my archives, there's a picture of me reading it while in Westfields at like 7 o'clock in the morning, waiting in line to meet Matt Smith, Karen Gillan, and Arthur Darvill at their Doctor Who Series 6 signing. Yeah, it was a long, long time ago. So with the Universal Monsters, with these movies, let's get into that. I was going back through these films. I rewatched a good chunk of the classic ones this time around.
Which ones did you watch?
Let's see. I watched Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, all three Frankenstein movies. And what was surprising to me, and the Invisible Man. What was surprising to me was how short they were. I sort of forgot that each one of these films, up until you get to, I think it's the Son of Frankenstein, or maybe even the Wolfman. Most of them are just over an hour long, which is great because you can blast through 2 in an evening, and you've basically spent the time watching what would be a contemporary length film today. And I was really surprised at just how snappy they were, how much they were able to tell a really great and compelling story within such a short time frame. Because if you look at kind of modern adaptations of this stuff, they're all heavily bloated with eccentric CGI or eccentric fight scenes, over the top jump scares and things like that, and they're all over 2 hours long or around there, and also incredibly boring, like the Keanu Reeves Dracula movie that is just
come on, it wasn't that bad.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. There's no
I liked it.
It
for
looks
all its
very
flaws.
Good.
Yeah, it does.
It
does
looks
look
very good, but I'm in Phil's camp there. If you're going to call a film Bram Stoker's Dracula, you better give me Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh,
exactly.
Yeah. I mean,
exactly.
It doesn't.
No,
you got a point there, right?
No. But yeah, so the first one I watched was Dracula. That is the first big Universal monster movie. The introduction I love. I love the Swan, listening to Swan Lake as they're doing the opening credits. Only a couple of the monster movies do that, have Swan Lake as their introduction. I wish they all had it, because to me it just felt like a really great, kind of tune to set it to. But yeah, what are your kind of initial thoughts on Dracula?
Dude, Dracula to me, that's like one of the first movies that I watched in that library of films way back in. Honestly, when I started, I didn't start as early as Luke or Matt did, but I was like in the mid 2000s where I was just like, let's go watch these classic films. Gonna go to the library, Luke, in Anderson, Indiana, get the DVDs, start
Yes.
watching them, and with Dracula, that's the first one that I watched. And then I watched the behind the scenes of that. And then I also noticed that they had a Spanish version that they filmed at the same time.
Yes.
Because they weren't doing dubbing or anything like that. So they actually had a separate crew to make a Spanish version. And I heard stories about how they would watch the American crew do their day of shooting, and then they would get ideas about how to improve it. And to be frank, the actual Spanish version does improve many little things in their version, even though they use the same sets but it's different actors, same sets, same kind of setups. And what I wanted to say about that is that fascinated me about these movies a lot more, because it's such a whole different world of how you used to make movies back then. And also the fact that they were packed and they were just over an hour made me just go, man, this is interesting stuff. And I loved the atmosphere, loved just watching all these iconic actors that you've known from, from different references and different products and stuff like that. I saw Bela Lugosi's face as Dracula so often as a kid. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen the iconography, but I've never seen the originals. And after I just went forward, right? Wolfman, Mummy, especially the Mummy, because I love the 1999 film. That's a movie I watched when I was a kid, quite often, and was very fascinated with. So going to the original was fantastic. Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Invisible Man, all that sort of stuff. We used to have friends come over. We used to watch these old films together because I wanted to get people some movie culture into them. You know what I mean? Instead of watching the regular kind of crappy movie that we would get at Blockbuster when that was still around, we would watch that. And I love them. I just love them so much. Every time I watch them, I get ideas, because for me, many of these films just inspire you, be it as a writer or as someone who wants to make films. It just gives you this energy, man, they really brought something to the table that movies now don't necessarily do. Sorry, that was very long-winded, but there you go.
I think I agree with almost everything that you said there, Phil. And it's true that the Spanish version, from a technical point of view, the Spanish version of Dracula is far superior. It's just let down by the fact that the actor playing Dracula is nowhere near as good as Bela Lugosi. He looks permanently shocked that he's even there. Whereas he's wide-eyed and it's almost comedic. It's more like Leslie Nielsen than in Dead and Lovely.
Oh man!
But
now that you mention it,
but Lugosi. It's interesting what you say, that you see Lugosi's face. Yeah, I reckon that applies to everybody. If you ask somebody to draw Count Dracula, they are gonna draw a man in an evening suit, white tie, black frock coat, and a cape. The regalia at the neck and stuff like that. They're gonna draw as near as makes no difference Bela Lugosi.
Yeah,
and he's one of those actors for whom a role is tailor-made. It's like Rathbone and Holmes or Christopher Reeve's Superman. They are the people that they're just destined to play that role. And he doesn't look like Stoker's Dracula, but he's the modern version of what a vampire is, and still to this day is. I think that's a testament to these films and that performance, that after all these years and all the ones that have come since, that image is still the one that people return to. And as a performance, it's fantastic. It's interesting. I don't think you ever see fangs. I think they concentrate on his eyes.
everything's the eyes. Everything.
Pinpoints of light in his eyes.
Yeah,
very much like Phil there. Yeah, and it's there's a great bit. There's a great scene with a Victorian flower salon. And
yes.
Oh yes.
He's got her in an alleyway, and his eyes are just lit, Everything else is
Yeah.
in shadow. And his eyes are lit, and he
Splash is
raises
great.
his. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and he raises his cape, and you don't need to see anything else, do you? You don't need to see the
No, you
fangs
don't.
going to the neck.
No.
You know exactly what's going on, and it's that sort of economy
Yes.
of storytelling that it there's a tendency, I think, to say to the audience, you need to see everything because you can't draw your own conclusions. And
Yes.
this film doesn't do that. This film says we're trusting in you to work out what's going on here.
Yes. I think what I really absolutely loved about Dracula particularly was, even though we're saying it's snappy, there's also it's also very slow, right? But in a good way. It's well paced. There's that wonderful moment when Renfield is in the castle, in his room. Dracula is there, and he cuts his finger open, and then you get that first shock of blood, and in a typical modern day horror, there would be like flash, and it would be dramatic and big, and he'd probably get murdered straight away. But what I love about it is Bela Lugosi's Dracula just slowly creeps over, like he's nervous, slowly heading for that sort of that blood, that addiction. And then there's the wonderful payoff of the crucifix that then pushes him away, because in the beginning in the movie, Renfield, who's the guy who's the lawyer guy doing the paperwork for Dracula to move to the UK and stuff. When Renfield is in the small village, there's the woman who basically is like, don't go to that castle. Like, you're insane if you go to that castle. He's like,
Dracula.
Yeah.
No.
He's like, it's fine. And she's like, take this crucifix. And it's wonderful because it's a great setup and payoff. Takes the crucifix. What, 5 minutes later, you have the first payoff. You understand why that's there. Because he sees it, he recoils, and but he doesn't like recoil in a way that's makes it's obvious to the viewer, because we know, but it's not necessarily obvious to Renfield. And then he slowly leaves the room, because he's like, he realizes he needs to get away from that particular item,
from this hellhole. Oh yeah. That's what you're talking about.
And then of course, I love the beginning. I love the aesthetic of everything. I love the castle being
perfect,
ghostly and cobweb ridden and broken down until you finally get to this lush part, of the other part of the castle. It just creates this interesting vision in your mind. I think when people think about these monster movies, because I think pretty much all of them take place in some sort of faux European country.
Yeah, exactly.
Except for, I guess, Dracula. Dracula takes place in a real location. I don't think the others take place in real locations. I can't remember. I take that back. Mummy is set in Egypt, so I guess that's a real location.
Is it all in Egypt though? I forget.
I think so. Yeah. But the atmosphere that they create in these places, I think, is wonderful. Like even down to the miniature sets of the miniature castles and things like that, and the big painted matte backgrounds and the lightning, the way that they use these practical effects to create stuff. Like, you look at it, you know that it's fake, but it's not like it's fake in a sense that you're like cringing at it. You're like, oh no, this real artistry went into this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. You can tell it's fake, but somehow, to me, it's less fake than bad CGI.
Yes.
I know it's a fake backdrop, but that sort of, it adds to the illusion for me, that, because it's certainly in Dracula, because it's well paced, but it's very stagey. It's very much like a stage play. I mean, it was partly based on a stage play, adapted from the novel, and some of that does transfer, because there are long, especially when we get to London, there are long drawing room scenes. That seem to the camera's almost static.
Yes.
That there are flashes of action, for want of a better word, but a lot of it is very static.
Yes.
But again, somehow that adds to the sort of alien nature of it all. It's not quite the real world. You're absolutely right about these films being set in a time and a place that we sort of think we know, but we're not really sure what it is.
Yeah.
Because there's a curious blend of modern and antique in these films. You know, everybody seems to be dressed in the 1930s suits.
Yes.
But the backgrounds that they're inhabiting, the worlds they're inhabiting, are very old-fashioned, you know.
Yes.
So it's a sort of Neverland.
Yes.
Seems to they could almost all be in the same universe, you know.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, it's very. There are a couple of things that add to the illusion of things not being quite right about the character, about Dracula himself. You know, that are quite unsettling. There's almost no music, for example.
Yeah,
I pinpointed it. Yes, carry on.
These days, horror films are filled with screeching violins and, you know, crashing drums and things.
Yep.
Dracula is almost a silent movie. It's almost it could have been 10 years before. It's, you know, it's not. It's got more in common with Nosferatu than it has with Bram Stoker, the Coppola Dracula. You know what I mean? But all that adds to it. It doesn't in any way. It's never boring.
No, it adds to the tension, I think.
It does. It creates this unreal world, the sense that things aren't quite right. They're a bit askew. When you expect music to come, it doesn't. And that in itself is quite unsettling.
Yes. They let the actors, they let the scene just breathe. And I think that's what is so refreshing when I was rewatching this, because that was one of my big notes on all of these films up until The Wolfman. The Wolfman is when the music just cranks up, and then it's cranked up in the House of Son of Frankenstein as well. But I remember just as I was watching this, I was like, you know what? I love just seeing these quiet scenes where they're just little creaks, footsteps, you know, nothing big and loud, no music telling me how to feel. You know, there's no like that horrific moment when Dracula's in London and he, you know, kills the flower seller. You know, there's no big re, you know, there's just it's just silent. You know, you hear a blood curdling scream in this dense fog. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to be scared.
Yeah, that's right. And I think to sort of hark back to a real event that it always reminds me of. It reminds me very much of what we know about the Ripper murders.
Yes.
That he arrives, he does his deed, and he disappears.
Yes. With
nobody noticing a thing.
Yes.
You know, whereas if it's heralded with, like I say, screeching violins, it becomes it robs the moment of some of its power.
Yes.
There's something much more disconcerting and unsettling for me about a silent, slow-moving being that takes your life and then disappears into the crowd.
Who's also charming.
And also charming. That's a terrifying concept. If you sit back and think about it, that is a terrifying concept.
Yes.
You know, and he's able to infiltrate himself into the drawing rooms of high society in London.
Yes.
I mean, Nosferatu deals with the idea of the vampire as a pestilence.
Yes. By
having a very rat-orientated theme and makeup. But Lugosi is much subtler. You know, he's the perfect dinner party guest in a way. He's dressed the part. He's urbane, but deep down, he's got a very sinister and terrifying agenda, and I think that's brilliantly conveyed.
Yes, I think so too. I love the way he is playing everyone in the scenes. I love the way that he's manipulating people. I particularly love what he does with Renfield.
Yes,
you know, you think he is. I'm hearing some sort of banging in the background in someone's. I don't know.
There are fireworks at my end.
Oh, fireworks.
Fireworks.
Okay.
It was like, here's a funny thing. A couple of episodes ago, fireworks on my end too.
Yes.
And now it's on your end. So
It's all right.
I'm not to
Fireworks
blame.
are nothing we can do about
I
it.
should have put a notice in the local press. Apologies.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's almost Guy Fawkes, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, if it gets too bad, I'll go and close the window.
Yeah. Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Now that I know what it is, it's fine. But no, like the way he transforms Renfield, I think is great. And I think Renfield. I think we should maybe talk about performances for a minute, because I think Renfield is one of the is really quite standout to me. So the way he, he comes into town, he comes into Transylvania thinking, he's all happy and fine, nothing's gonna happen.
Yeah, right.
Then
Lucky boy.
then he obviously gets duped by Dracula, gets taken over, manipulated, and then the next, after Dracula passes him, makes him pass out by spiking his drink, he then does the transformation deed, and there's just something, it's burned into my brain, the scene on the boat when the boat arrives in London. The police are on board. They're trying to find out what's going on. Everyone's dead. The captain's, there's this wonderful shadow scene. Oh my gosh, where the captain is tied to the wheel of the boat. You don't see it, but you see the shadow of it. And it's like you're saying that less, the less music is better. Less is more. Thinking of Jaws, we don't see the shark because less is far more. And then they open the door to the hold, and Renfield is just staring up at them with this just menacing, chaotic grin, chuckling to himself, and they're like, he's gone mad. He's performing.
In many ways, I think that's an improvement on the book, because we've got to know Renfield in the opening section of the film, so that when that happens to him, that's quite sort of emotional.
You feel bad for him,
You've got to know him, so it's happened to somebody that you've come to sort of think is going to be your protagonist. Whereas in the book, Renfield's already committed.
Yes.
And Jonathan Harker has gone to take his place because Renfield went mad. So I think it adds a dimension to Renfield's character for us to see him descend into madness.
Yes.
And you're right, we should talk about performance, because through a lot of these films, the same actors crop up. And Dwight Fry, who plays Renfield, one of the best.
Yes.
He's fabulous. He's great in Frankenstein.
Yep.
As the Hunchback.
Yep.
And his Renfield is magnificent. The scene when he's in the asylum and he's going, rats.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Hundreds of them. And his eyes are absolutely wide with, I don't know what it is. It's not fear. It's some sort of sexual excitement. He's enthralled with it all.
Yes.
And it's absolutely brilliant, that performance. And it's a bit like, I'll talk about it when we come onto the Frankensteins, but in many ways, history's overshadowed Dwight Fry by focusing on Lugosi and Karloff.
Yes.
But, if there was such a thing as a Dwight Fry Appreciation Society, I'd join it. I think he's great.
He was. Just a quick comment from the chat. James says, "Happy Halloween, lads. Disappointed you haven't all dressed up for it. I'm sorry.
Keeping
James.
it classy. We're keeping it classy here.
Next year,
this is scary enough.
That.
I tried. I put the black and white, and I put this turtleneck. Looks a little bit. It gives some kind of.
On that shelf there, there's a skull at the top of there. You might be able to see.
Hey.
Oh, there you go. I don't know. I got nothing. It's the colors look kind of like spooky, I guess. So Renfield, gosh, just great. I love everything about him. There's also some fantastic lines from Bela Lugosi, and I think there's one particular line that really sums up, I think, his Dracula's dilemma, and that is when he's speaking to the two ladies at the opera or the theater. And he's like, to die, to be really dead, must be glorious.
Glorious.
Yeah.
And that line never clocked with me before in the past, but watching it this time, I was like, I was like, this guy, this is what he wants. Like
Yeah,
he really wants to be dead. He's not going out there trying to find death because he knows it's not going to happen. His addiction is too strong for him to actually want to go and die, i.e., the blood. But deep down, that is absolutely what he wants. And I think that line just so wonderfully demonstrates his whatever his internal dilemma is summed up in that line. You know, he knows this would be great to have, but it's something he's never going to get by his hand.
Absolutely, definitely. And he has. There are two lines that I've always loved. One is a very famous one, and it's often parodied. It's when he's giving Renfield dinner, and Renfield says, "Do you want something?" And he says, "I never drink wine."
Yeah.
And that pause is just when you know that the ghost had learned his lines phonetically because he couldn't speak English. That pause is magical.
Yes.
My favorite line in the whole film is when he says to Edward Van Sloan, "For one who has not lived even a single lifetime, you are a wise man, Van Helsing."
Yes.
That is amazing.
Yes.
I think that is for one who has not lived even a single lifetime. You know, the implication being, and it ties into what you just said, Luke, because I've lived hundreds of the things.
Yes.
So how many wise men has he met over the years? You know, and you can recognize it straight away. I think that is an extraordinary line.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you've got lines like that, you said before, Luke, about less is more, and that is definitely right. So that the less dialogue there is, when it does arrive, it's absolutely golden.
Yes.
You know, because there's so little of it, it doesn't have chance to flag. It doesn't have chance to get a bit ropey or wooden.
Yes.
It is always on point, and that is a testament to screenwriting, I think.
Yes, I think so.
Film is a visual medium, isn't it? So Hitchcock always said you should be able to watch a film with the sound turned down and still know what's going on.
Yes.
And that's true. So the dialogue should sort of complement and support the visuals. And in Dracula, that is never truer.
Yes. Yeah. There's one thing I was going to add to Renfield's performance is there was something about the way he was acting that I felt. I don't know if there's any information out there. I didn't look this up, but I really felt that possibly Willem Dafoe took something from that performance when he was doing the Green Goblin. Because there's something about that wide-eyed, menacing grin, chaotic laugh. You know, there's something. I was like, I'm seeing Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. And I'm like, I don't think this is a coincidence. I do have a feeling that possibly there is some influence from that, but I have nothing to back that up.
I don't know. I wouldn't smoke it up either, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, especially since Willem Dafoe did play a vampire in what's the movie called? Came out in 2000. No. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Nope.
Oh, it's such a...
Look it up.
Is this the one where he played a version of Max Schreck?
Yeah.
Is it Shadow of the Vampire?
Shadow of the Vampire. I was gonna say Kiss of the Vampire, but I'm like, no, that's not it. That's Nicolas Cage.
That is a remarkable performance from Willem.
I love it.
That is. Luke... I mean, there's an actor being committed to a role, and then there's Willem Dafoe.
Oh yes,
it's absolutely fantastic.
He is.
Luke, have you seen it? You should watch it. Did we watch it together?
I haven't. We can watch it together. I've never seen it.
It's hilarious. It's great.
Van Helsing was another one that I loved. Sloan is obviously an incredible actor who, again, like many other, turns up in many of the Universal monster movies. But what I loved about him being Van Helsing felt very subversive. He's the hero of the story, and he's some old guy.
Yeah.
He's some old man. He's not like he's not Hugh Jackman with obnoxiously long hair running across rooftops.
Being James Bond?
You know, yeah.
Nor is he Peter Cushing running across the dining room table and pulling a curtain down.
Oh, I love that. Love it.
No.
Well, that is my favorite version of Dracula, adaptation of Dracula. And when I saw Van Sloan, because as I said before, I'd seen the Hammers before I came to Universal. I remember, even as a kid, I remember thinking, this bloke's not going to be running, pulling down curtains.
No.
We're going to get a different version here.
Yes. But it's wonderful. I love it because you do have Harker out there, and he's kind of wooden. I don't really like.
He just falls into the background. I don't even remember his face, honestly.
Yeah, I do feel like him and Mina, those two characters are they're a little flat. I'm just gonna say they're a little flat, but everything else around them is so good that it's not really about those two. They just are sort of almost like MacGuffins, like in a way.
They
Mina
are,
is a MacGuffin. You know, she's the Maltese Falcon. That doesn't really matter because it's about stopping Dracula, which is disappointing because it means that the only main lady in the movie is kind of pushed aside, which is disappointing. But I think we'll talk about the Mummy next because I think the Mummy makes up for some of that. But we'll come to that in a minute. But I do, yeah. There was a terrific line again from Van Helsing where he's like, "Superstition of yesterday is the scientific realities of today," and that I think was such a wonderful line. Very true, you know. And again, this line is mirrored in Thor, in the very first Thor movie.
Oh yeah.
Thor says almost the exact same thing to Jane Foster. And so you begin as I was rewatching these, you're beginning to see, I'm beginning to see or be reminded how much influence is really taken from these movies onto other things. I mean, the miniature castles, the way the kind of gothic backgrounds look, it's everything Tim Burton has ever done.
I was waiting to say Tim Burton.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes, you know, it is Batman, it is Batman Returns, it is everything he's done, which I loved. And I think what's interesting is one of the main topics or themes of this discussion is the fact that what Dracula Begins is really the first cinematic universe. Everyone talks about Marvel being the first, cinematic universe. No one's ever done anything like Marvel, yada, yada, yada. It's a bunch of hooey. People don't remember that there was life past 2010.
And Godzilla.
Yeah. And because it's interesting, because Dracula kicks it off in 1931. Dracula alone has he's in 3 sequels.
Yeah.
There's the what have I got? The Dracula's daughter, the son of Dracula, and the House of Dracula.
Yeah.
So and he's also in the House of Frankenstein. Which are, as we were talking before we began this chat, that essentially is sort of in a horror version of the Avengers. This a big team up sort of thing.
Yeah, we mentioned it briefly before, but these are, we talk now about the multiverse, the comic book multiverse.
Yes.
Well, as these films went on, they became their own multiverse because the monsters featured in each other's films. You have Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. House of Dracula, I think, has got all of them in, one scene or another. Yes. And they become a fight-off at the end between whatever monsters have been used. Well, that to me is almost every superhero film that's been made since the Avengers. They're all packed in together and they all end up fighting each other at the end.
Yes.
But Universal were doing it 70 years before.
70 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And dare I say, at a third of the running time.
Hey.
Yes. I mean, if you think about it, the pantheon of Universal monster movies is huge, but the main ones that kind of make up this, kind of subsect of their Universal monster universe, most of the films are an hour and 10 minutes. Yeah. They spawn sequels. Most of them get 3 sequels, but there is a fraction of the amount of films that lead up to sort of big crossover stuff. And the storytelling is, I was really impressed. I was really impressed going back through them because it was so sharp. As I was saying, an hour and 10 minutes. But before we started, I was comparing it to the season finale of Smallville because everything to me is related to Smallville.
I love it. Just keep going with that.
I was thinking about the finale of Smallville, which was meant to be 2 hours, but it's 80 minutes, I think it is. But the amount of stuff that happens in that 80 minutes is not a lot. It's a lot of standing around, a lot of pointless talking, a lot of dawdling, where these movies are Dracula was so sharp. There was this great opening bit where we're in Transylvania, then we're on the ship, then we're in London, and then it's about finding a way to destroy him. It moves at a really snappy pace, and there's wonderful character arcs, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say that there might be a few misses like Harker and Mina in Dracula, but taking the Universal Monster Pictures as a canon, whilst there might be some caricatures, I suppose, Una O'Connor being one of them in the Frankenstein films, but generally speaking, the characters and the monsters themselves have a lot of character depth and a lot of character development. So they managed to do that they managed to establish that in a few lines of dialogue, whereas now we seem to need scene after scene after scene to establish what one person is.
Well, for goodness sake, Thor has had three or four movies of finding himself. How many more times does this guy need to find himself?
And the Universal films don't have any subplots to speak of. There's no. I mean, there's subplots in the sense that there's a love story going on sometimes, or there's a father-son problem, but they're really informing the main plot. They're not plots of their own making or in their own right.
Correct.
Because it seems to me the doctrine at Universal was get in, tell the story, and get the credits rolling.
Yes.
There's almost no sort of once the monster's been killed, there's no come down time. The credits start rolling.
Yeah.
And I don't think that really has happened since Universal to such an extent or so well until American Werewolf in London, where he gets shot in the alleyway. You see him, and then it goes off.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. Films and books can outstay their welcome.
Yes.
And Dracula the book, I read a criticism of that once that said it sags in the middle. After we've had the great opening at the castle, and before we get to Whitby, there's a little bit of drawing room comedy that's not, which of these four men is Lucy going to marry? And well, who cares?
Exactly.
Who cares? Get her bitten and get her as a vampire, please.
Yep. Yes.
And all that is completely cut out of the Universal Dracula, so that it is totally streamlined down. And so is the Hammer version. The Hammer does it very well.
Yes.
It takes all the plot beats and gives them you in order.
Yes.
Streamlines everything else.
Yes.
I think the Hammer film's only something like 85 minutes. It's not 80 minutes, perhaps. It's not a long film.
Yeah.
These days you're lucky if you get a film that's less than 3 hours.
Oh, I know. I was seeing this in the news earlier today that a couple of new films coming out are going to be like over 3 hours long. I was just like, oh, can we stop it? Can we stop with the 3 hour long movies, please? But let's move on to the Mummy.
I did want to mention one thing about Dracula, just as an inspiration. Back in 2005, I was like, because of how well told the story is and how condensed it is and how how compressed and how simple it is to learn about characters, like you said, Matthew, with just certain forms of dialogue, like when Dracula tells Van Helsing, like, for someone who's just lived not even one lifetime, you're very wise. And that sort of stuff like really gets you inspired. So in 2005, I was 16, and I was like, what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and write a compressed version of that script with the same dialogue, but so it can go 15 minutes, and I'll make a short movie with my friends about it. Like, just do a remake of Dracula, the 1930s one. I got one day in, and I didn't finish it. And that's it. And that's it. Still have some footage of it, though. So
amazing. So the Mummy,
Woo! The Mummy.
We're gonna chat Frankenstein in a bit. Frankenstein's going to be the grand finale. But also, if anyone in the chat has either questions or comments about these movies, drop them in because we'd like to hear them.
Drop them in.
So The Mummy, 1932,
is basically Dracula.
Not really.
I mean,
is it? Is it at all? I don't think it's Dracula.
Structurally, it is. Like,
is it?
Yeah, that's what.
How?
Like,
How?
It. Matthew, back me up on this. You have
I'm
to.
not sure I can, Phil.
No. It's like Dracula. It's like Dracula because it's like it has the antagonist coming in, joining like a bunch of people. They're talking in different rooms, and then it's revealed that he's the Mummy. It's revealed he's Dracula. You know what I mean? It has the same kind. Okay, maybe I'm reaching.
Yeah.
That's the last time I've seen the Mummy, and I was just like, wait, is this like Dracula?
No.
But
no.
Okay.
I don't think it's anything like Dracula. I think it's a fascinating movie.
The ending is.
And if you think about the era in which it's in, 1932, 10 years ago, Tutankhamun's grave or his tomb has been discovered. Tutanmania is on the rise. The Jazz Age loved that and that used that iconography everywhere. What else is going on? And it was Conan Doyle is writing short stories about Egyptians and mummies and curses and all that sort of stuff. It's really vogue. And what was fascinating, the British Library is pillaging lots of artifacts and bringing them over. But what was interesting is the Mummy has some of the best iconic horror scenes, I think, but also one of the most interesting social commentaries of any of the horror movies, the Universal horror movies. But yeah, we'll come to that in a little bit though. But yes, what were your guys' thoughts on the Mummy before I go on my other tirades?
I just want to pick up on something you said there.
Yeah.
Luke, about Conan Doyle, who particularly wrote a story called Lot 249.
That's it, Lot 249.
And I will go so far as to say that almost, I won't say everything, but almost everything you know about the Mummy as a horror figure comes from that story, pretty much. The idea of resurrecting an ancient evil using a sort of scroll, and that thing coming back and not being too pleased about it, that in the same way that the Wolfman, everything you know about werewolf folklore is really created for that film. It's not to do with actual folklore. It's created for that film. And I'm going off tangent now, but the Wolfman, I think, is definitely more like Dracula than the Mummy is. But we'll perhaps talk about that later.
We should.
So I think that Karloff's The Mummy has some, whether it's conscious or not, it has some sort of background in Conan Doyle's Lot 249.
It did remind me of it, yes.
Yeah, but it's an extraordinary film, and Karloff's performance in it is magnificent.
Yes,
his sort of sense of decay is evident all the way through, and it's a pervasive decay. It seems to touch all of those around him.
Yes,
and I suppose a bit like Dracula, he is on a mission to find his lost love, which is something that people want to put on Dracula that isn't really there.
No, yeah, of course. Yeah,
Going back to the Coppola thing,
Oh yeah, the Coppola thing.
Really, that's a Mummy plotline.
Yes.
But the Mummy contains, without doubt, one of the best openings to any of these films.
Oh my God, yes.
I love it.
the ending of that opening sequence where you just see the two bandages doing that.
Oh,
Yes.
love
And
it.
and the young archaeologist has gone completely insane at sight
He's
of
just
it.
laughing.
And it says he went out for a walk. I mean,
I went out for a walk.
it's for what it takes a lot of guts for a filmmaker to give such a comic line
Yes.
at the start of what is essentially a very, very creepy film. You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I think the Mummy is creepy rather than
It
scary.
is. Yes.
I don't think it's necessarily, scary. Hammer's Mummy becomes much more. He's essentially Michael Myers in bandages.
Yeah.
He just never stops. He's just charging through windows and throwing Peter Cushing around the study and things. Whereas there's something much subtler and much more disturbing about Karloff's presence and his intentions and how he intends to go about it. I mean, he's essentially going to murder her,
Yes.
because he thinks that she's the reincarnation of his lost love. And
yes,
I mean, that's a pretty selfish thing to do if you think about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of these films, when I was watching them in readiness for this, in preparation for this, German expressionism kept coming to my mind.
Oh yeah.
The way they're all shot, and some of them are shot by. I mean, Karl Freund did Dracula. There's lots of echoes of Caligari and films like that. The Man Who Laughs and all those sort of films that pervade these films. Yeah. And The Mummy is definitely one of those.
Yes.
I mean, it's just incredible. Its use of black and white is astonishing.
Yeah, I think a lot of these movies.
I mean, when we talked about film noir, Luke, we said, didn't we, that film noir starts with shadow and says, right, how much light can we let in here to get away with? How much can we get away with? The Mummy is very much like that to me. It starts in darkness.
Yes.
And then the lights come up just enough, rather than it starts in light and they lower them to get the effect. It starts in darkness for me.
Yes. No, absolutely.
A magical film.
Yes. No, I loved it. It was fascinating. I think the two people who steal the show are Karloff's The Mummy. His Ardith Bay character is fantastic and creepy and haunting. It's what I found interesting again is and this is a thread kind of throughout these films, is each of the monsters they're not just pure evil. There's some sort of there's some sort of motivation behind why they are the way they are now. It's not just they're really, these are really tragedies. We're looking at the tail end of a tragic story, of someone's tragic story. Which I loved. And you get that with Dracula, to die would be glorious. You get that with the Mummy. All the Mummy wants to do is be with the love of his life, who was died at a young age, and then he tried to use sorcery to bring her back, and as a result was buried alive for this dark using this dark voodoo magic or whatever it was, and then now he's back, and this is all he's trying to do. He's not really nefarious. He's not being necessarily wicked per se. He's just the reaction of these particular circumstances, and so I quite loved that about this particular movie, and that sort of trail throughout all of them. And I think it's really interesting in both the Wolfman and the Frankenstein movies when we get to that. But I think Zita Johann's Helen Grossenver, she steals the movie. She is
standout.
I didn't, like I said, the lady characters in Dracula are very one-dimensional. My God, not only is she a knockout, she's a knockout in a performance. Like, everything about her is just
absolutely.
Like, you were glued to her scenes. Outstanding, Matt.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And when she's on screen with Karloff, I mean, it crackles. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And what is so often either overlooked or just not understood or just plain not achieved is the sense that so often that you don't realize, you don't believe that these two people were ever in love, but in the Mummy, in Karloff's version, you absolutely do. You can see the pain in his, that he's desperate to get her back, and there are several close-ups of his face in that makeup that's like old parchment skin, and the heavy sunken eyes.
Yes.
And you can see the pain behind it, and it's this, we'll talk about it in more detail, no doubt, but it's the same sensitivity, I suppose, and the same anguish that the Frankenstein's monster has. There's just something about Karloff's. I think James Whale said to him, director of Frankenstein, said to him, "You have a face of infinite possibilities," or something along those lines. And you think, well, he's absolutely right.
He is.
And all you need is to give Karloff a good close-up. And he does, and him and the camera do the work for you. You don't. If you're the director, you just say, "Do your thing, Boris." Give him a close-up, and we'll have cinema gold.
Yes,
it's absolutely brilliant.
Yes,
but you're right.
Absolutely.
A lot of these monsters, we are talking tragedy, and we are talking caprice of nature. I mean, nobody wants to become a vampire. I don't think you're picked on by somebody else, and you turn into Dracula, who then goes and does the picking on of other people. And Karloff's character in The Mummy isn't the first person to try and achieve to cheat death. By, uncertain and unwise ways. That is a common theme in these gothic horrors. Trying to be God, or trying to overcome nature in some way. That's what Jekyll and Hyde is all about in spades, both the book and the film. It's what Frankenstein's about, and it's what The Mummy is about. It's about man knowing his place, and when he doesn't, he gets a very, very unpleasant
wake-up call.
But another point I wanted to pick up on that you said, Luke, was the darkness of these films. They are. You might not always see it, but there are some very violent and unpleasant things that either happen or are suggested to have happened.
I love that stuff.
And like say now we've sort of lost the ability to do that, I think, because now we feel we have to show it. So, and I think that robs something of it. Whereas in The Mummy,
totally,
it's all sort of just indicated to you. Because really, it is just there are no real scares in The Mummy, are there? There are no real sort of jumps. It is a drama about lost love. It's just that, the man who's lost his love just happens to be a supernatural reincarnated being. It's a dark romance.
Yes.
And it's all the better for it. I think it's one of the most adult of the Universal horrors. There's no sort of grand guignol aspect to it. There's no melodrama as such. It's all very muted for me, and it's all very again, it's very silent, and it's very I don't want to say slow, but you know what I mean. It's very measured in its pace.
Yes. It's also one of the few, or I think the only one of these movies that is finite. It's when it's over, it's over. The Mummy does not come back. There is no return of the Mummy within this particular stream of films, which I quite liked. But the other thing, as I was mentioning earlier, was I think there is a really interesting social commentary going on, and one that I hadn't really thought about or picked up on before. And I don't know if this is because one of my really good friends was doing museum studies a few years back. My friend Deej.
Hi,
Deej. and so she did a lot of work at the British Museum and stuff like that. But what was so fascinating to me is there's several lines in this movie that are making commentary on the purging of artifacts in other countries, and who do they really belong to, and what is the role of an archaeologist, which I loved. And there's at the very beginning, when they find the scroll and all that kind of stuff, and they're deciding, should they open the box, should they not open the box, that Pandora's box. There was one of the characters says at the very beginning, we didn't come to dig for medals. They're not here for fame and fortune. They're here for discovery and science and knowledge and history. But then later towards the end of the movie, one of the main archaeologists, his son, I can't remember his name off the top of my head now, makes a flippant comment about how he's angry that the Egyptian government are keeping the relics that they have found in the Museum of Cairo, and his dad says to him, it's for science, not for loot, which I loved. Because for one particular reason, it is acknowledging that these artifacts belong to this country. They don't, just because some British guy found them doesn't mean that they are British property or should be taken to the British Museum, but should absolutely be kept here where they belong. Who rightfully owns them? Now, whether that country, if they want to loan them out or whatever, that's a completely different story. But the ownership of those pieces of historic relics belong to the country in which they are discovered. And I was really impressed, given the fact that this is just 10 years after Tutankhamun, given this is just the mummy craze is huge at this point. The fact that this little dinky, well, not dinky, but this little mummy movie has the awareness to make these little commentaries is fascinating to me.
Yes, I agree with that. And because it's absolutely right. And it's one of the things that's always sort of troubled me, for want of a better word, about the Indiana Jones movies. Because Indiana Jones is the worst type of grave robber that you're talking about.
He is.
He openly says, I want fortune and glory, kid, or whatever it is that he says in one of them. And you're right, that there is this sense that they can go and loot and grave rob a very important figure in ancient Egyptian mythology, and just take it all for themselves. I mean, it's sacrilege.
Yes,
that's what it is. It's looting of the dead.
Yes,
and to that extent, certainly in Karloff's version and in the Hammer one, they sort of get what they deserve. Yeah. Because for that very reason, and it's right. It's something that's happened in throughout the centuries, that people have claimed things for their own.
Yeah.
The Elgin marbles is a famous example. That we claim these things as our own, when really we've got absolutely no entitlement to them.
Yes.
And then we're surprised when people try and come and take them back, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think I suppose that ties into what I said before about being one of the more adult of the films, because it is saying something. It has got something to. It's got a message to impart.
Yes.
And all the best films, all the best horror films, crime films, whatever they are, have something to say about the world that you're living in.
Yes. And as much as we love Brendan Fraser's The Mummy and the Mummy movies, they don't really have that hard-hitting of a commentary.
No, but I mean,
but they
I'd
are
be disappointed if it had.
Exactly, they are fun. They are very fun.
Well, I take back what I said at the beginning of this conversation now. So.
The Mummy is just like Dracula. Proven wrong.
You had to bring it back. You had to bring it back up. Okay, fine.
Yes. So
I mean, there is that sense that he for his own ends doesn't really matter what those ends are. But for his own ends, this monster, for want of a better phrase, infiltrates his way into other people's drawing rooms. I mean, that is a similar theme, a similar trope.
Yes.
It's a theme, it's a
yes.
trope.
Yes. But he infiltrates. He doesn't want to infiltrate their drawing rooms. In fact, he's invited to dinner and he declines. He only goes to the guy's house because he's following the girl. Because it's all about Helen, I think her name was. That's the only reason. Because remember, he invites them over to dinner, and he's like, "No, I don't do that." So
yes, he does.
He's really not trying to get into people's houses. He's really just trying to get other people to, I guess, infiltrate the business aspect, to get them to dig up the things that he needs, because he knows where they are, and he doesn't have the.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Actually, yeah, you're right. He's using them for his own ends. Perhaps I should sort of put it that way.
Yes.
But unlike Dracula,
yeah,
he's trying to, as you said, he's trying to right a wrong.
Yes.
There are two things going on, aren't there? There's his attempts to get his love back, the love of his life back.
Yes.
And there is the quest to recover the stolen items.
Yes.
And so he has two motivations for what he does.
Yeah.
And that's pretty. That's pretty deep for what's essentially viewed as a bandage-covered, lurching zombie. I mean, it's so much more than that. It's so much more intricate and nuanced than that. Whereas Christopher Lee's version really, I think, is that bandage-covered zombie. That's what he is. He's a killing machine.
Yes.
And Karloff's is quite different.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to the Invisible Man, because I'm sensitive to time, and we have a still a good journey ahead of us. But just a quick one. Chris in the chat says the original Mummy is a classic. Chris, I completely agree with you. It is
absolutely,
honestly fantastic. I'm
not saying I didn't like it. I still love it. But there you go.
It's probably, I mean, it's hard to judge, but it's probably my fourth favorite. My top three being the original three Frankenstein movies. It might be number 4, followed by Dracula, but that's a different conversation. So the Invisible Man, 1933. I mean, Universal Universe is cranking these things out. 1931, 1932, 1933, like they are just bashing these movies out. But what's fascinating is they're all good. Like,
what's fascinating is they're all good.
If you compare this to the big universe that we have now, the Marvel movies, the DC movies, all that kind of stuff. Iron Man 1's good. Iron Man 2's not good. Captain America 1 is kind of bland. Thor 1's kind of bland. The Avengers, really good. Iron Man 3, mixed bag. I like Iron Man 3, but a lot of people don't. But what's interesting is that these films that they're cranking out are one after another are solid movies, and The Invisible Man, again, is no exception to this. It is terrific, I think. There is a level of restraint in this movie that I love, and it's the fact that we don't see Cloud Rains' face in this stinking movie. It's his voice is so powerful.
Until the last frame, I think you see it at the last frame.
Yes, the very last frame, he does become visible, but it's the restraint of leaving that to the very, very, very end, where again you think about movies now, if there's any sort of individual in a movie, like that mask is off all the time. They've invented technology for superheroes in which their masks just dissolve off of their faces, so there doesn't have to be the physical thing anymore. Whereas this was just like, no, he's the Invisible Man. He's going to be invisible. And how
what do you expect? He's invisible.
How scary. Well, there's no like flashbacks. There's no let's go back before or anything. It's just we get to understand and know a character who we've never seen. I guess you could compare it similar to, in a way, The Mandalorian. If you want a modern example of a character who you never see his face until like way down the line. The Mandalorian is an example of that. We only know him via his voice and physical actions, which I think is a masterful job for an actor to accomplish.
Dude, I've been in arguments so many times about movies that could be made, that have protagonists that you don't see their faces and stuff like that, but they're still a physical presence. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
Countless times, and to be fair, these are people who don't know that much or haven't watched enough movies to know this. But it's like they always say, "But if you don't see their face, how can we know what they're thinking or what?" Yeah. Not true. There's so much movies can do, and this is a really good example of it because this movie's scary. This movie is terrifying.
It helps, of course, that you've got Claude Rains, whose voice was his greatest asset.
Perfect.
Oh yeah.
And all the more so when you know that he was gassed in the First World War and almost lost his voice completely, and he couldn't say his R's. He had a strong Cockney accent. And when you listen to him, you think whoever his speech therapist was, either in recuperation or at drama school or both, they were bloody good.
Yeah,
because that voice is amazing, and it carries that character all the way through. It's incredible. It's an incredible performance, and I can't imagine. I mean, I think it was his first film role, so he's eager to please, perhaps. But
the studio didn't want him. The studio didn't want him at first because he was a no name actor at the time.
But I can't imagine any Hollywood actor now agreeing willingly to have his face covered for 99.8% of the film.
Right.
When's that ever going to happen?
No way.
All right, Mr. Cruise, you're cast, but we're not going to show your face. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen, is it?
No.
This film is, someone in the comments I think just said the special effects are fantastic, and
yes, they are. Yes.
Well, I very often say that I don't like films that are all special effects, and this is the exception perhaps to the rule because it is. They're breathtaking even now.
I think to back onto that, there are times where there is maybe a visual effect that is tremendous, and I think of something like Lord of the Rings and Gollum, terrific. As a CGI character, it's essentially what the Invisible Man is, or Davy Jones in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. That is a moment where CGI is used perfectly. And in service of story and character, not just spectacle, but carry on.
Bringing a character to life. Pretty much.
Yeah. I agree. Yes, I agree. I mean, to counteract that, it always struck me in the film From Hell, which is a pretty awful film.
Yep. But I kind of like it.
You do.
In the graphic novel, the Elephant Man is a character.
Yes.
But he's a character with a purpose.
Yes.
Whereas in the film, he's just there, it seems to me, so they can say, look how good the makeup is.
Yes.
And sometimes CGI feels a bit like that to me. Look how clever we are.
Absolutely.
And absolutely. when it's done well, sparingly, then when you don't notice it, I suppose is what I'm saying, it's very good. But
yes.
But going back to the Invisible, I mean, the Invisible Man required at the time so much ingenuity to pull off what was essentially would never been seen before. There's the famous scene where he's in front of the mirror and he's taking the bandages off.
Yes.
In front, and the reflection is doing the same thing. And that when you read how that was done, there's something like 12 different plates of film.
Wow. Yeah.
It's just amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And he takes the nose off. And there's nothing there.
Great.
It's absolutely brilliant. And I think he takes does he not take a drag on a cigarette and you see the smoke go into his lungs and things? It's just, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yes. I completely agree. And I think that's the other thing I want to kind of tack onto this is the look and style of all of these these quote unquote monsters are absolutely iconic. And no matter how many times these things have been rebooted, remade, reimagined, nothing has been able to beat
No.
the simplicity of what they've done with these monsters.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and I think he's one of them. I mean, the bandages,
Yes.
the fedora,
The glasses.
those bizarre kind of steampunk, glasses that have the blinders on the side. It's all so simple, and a guy in a suit, just this face, the weird nose, glasses,
Yeah.
the hat. It's simple.
And it's exactly how Wells describes it in the book. That's another thing that I adore
cool.
about it. They're not trying to deviate from it in any way.
No.
But you're right. When he appears in the inn, and you first see him, he's shot from below.
Yeah.
So that, you know, he's as he does with every other character in the film, he's looking down on you.
Yes.
You know, like metaphorically and literally.
Yes.
He's looking down on everybody.
Yes.
And it's such a bizarre image, this fake nose. And then when you see him in his rooms that he's rented, and he's got the bandages on, the goggles, and the hair coming out of
the wig,
bandage.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
And you think, and he's sitting like that because he's frustrated. And you think, this is in its own way as terrifying a makeup as Frankenstein was, as
absolutely
any of the other types of monster, you know, the Wolfman was, or whatever. Yes. This in its own way is terrifying. And what you know is, although you can't see it, beneath it is just a normal looking man.
Exactly.
You know, his monster is himself. It's his head.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is what I like about. I mean, what I like about the Invisible Man particularly is that of all the monsters, really, he's the one that starts mad and gets madder.
Yes.
Yes.
He's not really. I mean, Larry Talbot as the Wolfman has a character arc that is tragic.
Yes.
Jack Griffin is just a mad scientist who stays mad.
Yes. Yes.
And then goes on one of the biggest killing sprees.
Oh my God!
Yes, dude,
killing everybody.
I think he kills an entire train full of people by changing the points.
Yeah. Yes. Kills his best friend by locking him in a car and throwing him over a cliff.
Throws him off a cliff. Yeah, he batters a policeman to death.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, he's absolute as violence goes, as violent killing goes. He is up there. I mean, he's a slasher before slashers were a thing in cinema, in horror cinema.
No, it's very true.
Absolutely merciless.
Yeah, yeah. I love that aspect. I really did like that. It was fascinating because he's the first monster now who is just, I guess, more or less a normal guy.
Yeah.
You know, and he is by far the most violent. It is the drug. It is the drug that is making him become more violent. They make the comment, but in his sort of tragic story, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and there's no redemption at all.
No, there's no redemption at all. And I think they do make the point that it's the drug, but I think they also very subtly make the point that this was always in him somewhere.
Yeah.
The drug has just amplified it and brought it out.
Yes.
But there's a fabulous scene.
Sorry, I just got to add on to that because it just made me think of another thing that this could not necessarily it's taken from this, but Marvel do the exact same thing with Captain America. Captain America's super soldier serum brings out your best qualities.
Yes.
So Captain America becomes great, whereas the Red Skull, who uses the same serum, becomes more evil.
Yes. So I have an image of Griffin, which is the scientist's name in The Invisible Man. At school, he'd be the boy who would be picking the legs off spiders, and he'd be the boy who trips you over in the corridor, or there's always something in him.
Yeah.
That means that he could go on this absolute rampage.
Yes.
But there's a wonderful scene where he's talking to the love interest,
Mm.
and then he's calm, and it's as if she's calmed him, and he's saying, she's called Flora, and he's
Flora,
saying,
yes.
I've missed you, Flora, and I'm sorry I've been away. And she's saying, well, we can put it right. We can, just come home and we can put it right.
Yeah.
And then that scene escalates as the drug starts to take back over, and he starts talking about an army of invisible men.
Yes.
And he says, and we'll start small. A few murders here or there.
Yeah.
And,
God.
and it's just throwaway violence.
Yes.
It's just mind-boggling.
It is. It is.
And all delivered in this great Claude Rains box of chocolate style voice.
Yep.
Which makes you think, it also makes you sort of smile along with it and say, yeah, this sounds good to me, Claude. When do we start?
Right.
It's insane.
He's got you convinced. It's insane. Chris in the chat asks us, who is your favorite Universal monster? Start with Phil.
Well, it goes like this: Creature from the Black Lagoon. I can't help it. Wolfman, Mummy, and I think Dracula goes at the end there. Oh. Frankenstein's monster is fantastic, but you got to pick some favorites, and those are mine. I think I always go up to it always rotates from Creature, Wolfman, or the Mummy to me.
Okay, good. Matt?
Well, my favourites are Dracula and Frankenstein, but that's because of the literary side of it, really. But as pure universal monster, it's the Wolfman for me.
Good. Which we'll come to. We'll start talking about the Wolfman now. But my answer, by the way, is Frankenstein. It's the film I connected with the most when I was a kid. So therefore, to me, I just have that connection to it. So yeah, Frankenstein is number one in my book. Wolfman 1941. So we're going to talk Wolfman, and then we're going to cap this conversation off with discussing the Frankenstein trilogy. Wolfman is, I think, by far the most obvious of tragic stories, maybe, in the Universal Monster franchise.
Yeah, it's very
yes,
like you said.
Oh, yes. I should add that back to Invisible Man real quickly is, of course, this one does spawn several sequels. So kind of adding to the Universal Monsters universe. You've got The Invisible Man Returns, The Invisible Woman, 1940, and then The Invisible Agent in 1942. So this,
I think Vincent Price was in one of. Is Vincent Price in The Return?
He is in one of them. Yes,
he is.
I think it's the second one. I think he's in the second.
I think it is the second one. Yeah.
So next Halloween, when we do the extended Universal Monsters universe. But anyway, back to Wolfman. Again, I love this. I love this opening. I love the fact that Larry Talbot is this guy coming back from the States to his home in the wake of his brother's death, and there's this sort of burying the hatchet moment that needs to happen between him and his father. It starts off with rebirth, fresh start, and yes. Then how wicked does this fresh start become for him? Just fascinating.
It is fascinating. One thing, I'll get the funny stuff out of the way in inverted commas, because it's always struck me that if you're Lon Chaney Jr. and your father is Claude Rains, who's one of the shortest men in Hollywood,
the Invisible Man, by the way,
who's the Invisible Man, yeah. Claude Rains is the father. If he's your he's a short man and Lon Chaney is huge. So what Larry Talbot's mum looked like, I can only dream of.
Yes.
But it's unlikely casting, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yes.
But that point aside, I find this film absolutely fascinating.
Mm.
I think it's groundbreaking in a variety of different ways. I mentioned before that almost everything you know about werewolves really comes from this film.
Yes. Yes.
Silver bullets,
Yep.
or only being able to be killed by something silver, in this case, the head of a cane, the handle of a cane. The idea that even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf.
Yeah.
The idea that it happens when the wolfbane blooms, which is at certain times of the year.
Yes.
But funnily enough, not a single full moon in sight.
Yes.
You never see the full moon. You do in the others, you do in the sequels.
Yes.
But you never see a full moon in The Wolfman.
No.
It's much more obsessed with the pentagram on the palm of your next victim's hand and things like that.
Yes.
But I just think it's one of those. It's one of those films that's got everything in it.
Yes.
You can take it for what it is, which is a story about a man who turns into a wolf and kills people.
Yeah.
Or you can look at it as something a lot more complex.
Absolutely.
Which I think it is.
Yes.
I think it's about the beast in all of us. Because it seems to me that one of the points about even a man who is pure in heart is that this can happen to the best of us. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can find yourself in a curse or in some way find your life spiraling out of control.
Yes. Yes.
And it's a similar, unlike the others that we talked about, unlike people like Griffin, Frankenstein, Larry Talbot is just an ordinary bloke going about his business. Or he tries to do a good thing by killing an animal that's already mauled to death a young girl.
Yes.
And what thanks does he get? He gets this life of absolute pain. And what's interesting to me, and I don't think it applies to any other of the Universal monsters, or really anyone else in horror that I can think of, he spends every other film that he's in searching for a way to die.
Yes.
He's desperate for someone to kill him.
Yes.
And he hasn't got the guts to do it himself.
Yeah.
And as a character arcs go, that's a pretty sad one.
Yes.
Whoa, that's grim.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and there's nothing he can do about it. You know, the others, to a certain extent, they've got the fate in their own hands. But he's just a victim of.
He is
a bad night. You know.
Yes.
And I find that there's something really tragic about that.
Yeah.
Really sort of.
Totally.
You know, that the caprice of nature, it can happen to you. And I suppose the metaphor is any of the worst illnesses in the world can happen to you. You know, any of life's tragedies can happen to you.
Yeah.
Because this is a horror film, it has to be turning into a wolf, of course. But
right.
The serious point is that life can be cruel and life can be unfair.
Yes. Yeah, because it's wonderful because it's wonderfully tragic because you see this really just he's a good, honest, very likable guy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just his life just descends into utter tragedy. You know, whatever that metaphor can be used for, as you were saying there, Matthew, like disease, whatever it can be. Like it's just you never know what can happen to you. And sometimes you don't have control over it. And he has no control. He's losing complete control.
Loses complete control. Yeah,
you know?
Loses complete control. And a bit like mentioned it before, Jekyll and Hyde, which is about the two sides of man.
Yes.
What happens to Larry Talbot is that his animalistic, sort of almost prehistoric side comes out, and he becomes just an animal because we are all our fundamental roots. Animals. You know, we come from the beasts.
Yes.
And he reverts back to that, just as Hyde does.
Yes.
Once Jekyll's taken that potion. But unlike Jekyll, Jekyll brings it on himself. You know, Talbot is just out with two girls and tries to save one of them.
Exactly.
Really sad. It's heartbreaking.
No, yeah, I think that message, that kind of overall theme in The Wolfman, is in itself a horrific thing to get in the story. And I think that's also part of what I love about these horror movies, is that it doesn't have to be about the pop-up scares and the gore and the, you know, and the thrills. It's just the revelation that, you know, you know, things can happen to you in life that you just can't control, and this is, you know, and that's it, really.
Yeah, and Kurt Siodmak, who was the writer, he was a German Jew, and he escaped Germany when the Nazis were coming to their fore, should we say. And he makes the point in an interview that he couldn't help being what he was.
Yeah.
So he was cursed because of his nature.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that he's making that very point in The Wolfman. He's saying that you can't help what you are.
Yeah.
And bad things will happen as a result.
Yeah.
You know, alienation can. Larry Talbot is alienated from his family.
Yes.
From the rest of the village.
Yes.
In a much deeper sense, he's alienated from himself because he thinks he's going mad.
Yes.
So an alienation was you know what Siodmak felt when he had to flee his home country and you know, his birthright essentially. There are a lot of things going on in this film.
Yes.
It isn't just a man sprouting hair and fangs. You know?
Yeah, there are, again, as we were discussing some of these other films, there is a much more interesting subtext going throughout all of these original horror films. Something that is much more subtle and deeper than I think a lot of contemporary horror films. You know, there's very little subtlety to Friday the 13th or you know, Freddy Krueger or you know, Chucky, you know, Michael Myers. There's you know, there might be moments of interesting bits in there, but these particular movies did really well to have these very quite deep core messages that go beyond just your standard Saturday popcorn movie. Which I think is partly why all of these movies have stood the test of time. I mean, they are all almost 100 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't have anything with these particular characters to match how good these originals were.
That's absolutely right. And I'd make another point, which is that the writing on these films is so good.
Yes.
Because they are operating, well, the Wolfman certainly, and Frankenstein are operating on those. Like, you can watch it as a monster movie if you want, and you can have a great 80 minutes or 71 minutes, whatever it is. But if you want to see what they're actually on about, it's there for you to see.
Yes.
But it isn't, you know, battered over your head with a sledgehammer.
No.
Whereas when we want to deliver a message, it seems to me, when we want to deliver a message in cinema now, we have to, you know, sort of neon light it all over the show to say the message is coming, folks. The message is coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas these really are sort of working on two different levels for you can like I say, you can take it as one if you want and leave it there, go out of the movie theatre and go and have dinner and have a great time.
Yes.
Or you can leave the movie theatre and think, well, something was being said then.
Yes.
And what was being said was extremely important.
Yes.
You know, and The Wolfman for me is one of those, and it's the cleverness of the writing.
Yes.
It's the cleverness of the writing. It starts with him. He's already alienated because there's clearly been a rift between him and the family.
Yeah.
And it's taken the death of his older brother to bring him back to the family home. And Claude Rains gives a nice little speech about being British. You've got to be you've got to have reserve, and you can't show your emotions. Well, we'll have a new start, and we'll have no such reserve between us.
Yes.
And Larry says, "That's great, Father." And as soon as they've done that, he's alienated in a way that you could never possibly have imagined.
Right. And then who has to deal the fatal blow on the son?
Yeah.
The dad.
The dad's got to go and kill him. And all the way through, what's great is all the way through, Claude Rains has been dismissing the idea of a werewolf.
Yes.
Whereas everybody else has been telling Larry Talbot that it's true.
Yeah.
Evelyn Ankers is saying, well, people believe it, so maybe it is true.
Yes.
The gypsy woman is saying, it certainly is true because it was my son that bit you.
Yes.
And that you passed it to death.
Yeah.
And Lon Chaney is thinking, well, is it true or isn't it true? What's going on, sort of thing. But all the way through, Claude Rains is saying, no, it's all in your head. It's all in your head.
Yep.
Dude, yeah.
Which was the original idea. The original script had no transformation scenes. It had no wolf.
Oh, interesting.
It was all left to the audience to decide whether he'd transformed or not.
Oh, that's fascinating. That is fascinating.
And there are bits of that still sort of cross over into the film that we've got today.
Yes.
The Claude Rains line about, I believe anything's possible in a man's mind, I think is an overhang from that.
Yeah.
But as studios are wont to do, they said, no, we've got to see the monster if people are coming to a monster movie. So
Yes. Just a few questions in the chat before we discuss Frankenstein, the Frankenstein trilogy. Chris asks, what are your thoughts on the makeup artist Jack Pierce?
Great guy. Like without him, you wouldn't have all the iconic imagery that we have today.
He's a legend.
Pioneer.
He's a legend. And given what he had to work with, he was bordering on genius.
Yes. Chris has asked a bunch of questions. We're not going to be able to get through all of them, but this is an interesting one, I think. What's your favorite werewolf transformation? I'm going to start, and I'm going to say Werewolf in London.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just so good.
Everyone loves that one.
And it still is. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen, but on YouTube, there are loads of videos of like teenagers or early 20s watching films for the first time, old films for the first time.
Right, yes, yeah.
And hands down, every single one of them that watches American Werewolf in London, when it gets to that scene, they are like aghast.
Yes.
And I think that is a pretty major, because I remember being aghast in 1981.
Yeah.
83, whatever, seeing it for the first time. So for sort of 40 odd years later, for people to still have that same reaction is a testament to just how good that really is.
Absolutely. And just quickly, Chris asks, what are your thoughts on the Hammer horror movies? We're not going to go into the Hammer horror movies tonight because we're just strictly on Universal, but I will say, and you guys can add a quick comment, I'm a big fan of the Hammer horror movies. I think next Halloween, that might need to be the Halloween special, is diving into the Hammer horror stuff. Because
I'll just say, I love them.
Yes.
Yeah. I quite enjoy them as well, except for which one did we watch? Bride of Dracula?
Bride, I think, was really terrible, if I remember right. But I might be misremembering. I would need to go back and rewatch them.
We do need to discuss it.
I legit.
They tail off towards the end, towards the mid to late 70s. They tail off, but
yes,
from the late 50s all the way through the 60s, they are.
It's true. They're very good.
Solid.
Yeah. I remember watching one where there was a Frankenstein was in it, and the makeup just looked abysmal. It was towards the end of the Hammer goodness, and that was sad. Okay, Frankenstein.
Okay, here we are.
We can discuss this as the Frankenstein trilogy. So this is fascinating to me. I grew up watching Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, but I have absolutely no recollection of the Son of Frankenstein until about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was looking for the Blu-rays of the Frankenstein movies, and Son of Frankenstein popped up with Basil Rathbone and Karloff, and I was like, what? There's a third film? I had no idea this existed. You know, I'd known about
me?
House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, and stuff like that, but I'd never seen or heard about this. So I
When
watched
the hell did this happen?
Phil and I watched it, and unlike the classic, you know, Universal monster movies, it's much longer. It's 2 hours and some, I think. The music is very loud, similar to the werewolf, the Wolfman. Music is very loud in that compared to the early Hammer movie. Or God, Hammer's stuck in my head now. Early Universal movies, the music cranks up in particularly in Wolfman and in Son of Frankenstein. But yeah, I watched the Son of Frankenstein. And I was blown away by it. I was like, it's
great,
fascinating and wonderful. But I think, I love the Frankenstein movies. I love the trilogy. I think the way both 1 and 2, both Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein, the way that those movies begin, I feel are genius. I love the fact that the first movie has this Sloan, the actor. What's his first name? Help me out,
Edward Van Sloan.
Edward Van Sloan comes out on stage and basically just does this creepy warning of the audience. You know, this is horrific. You might not want to stay. Well, we warned you, you know. And then he goes back, and then you go into the movie, and again with the second one, that wonderful back and forth with Mary Shelley and whoever the singer is, I can't remember his name, and Percy Shelley discussing not only Mary writing of this book, but the interesting contradiction between, you know, looking at this, you know, beautiful woman with such a taste for the macabre, and also quite fascinating, again with the social commentary a little bit, acknowledging the fact that A, this is a story written by a woman, and B, this is a story that she would get published, but there would be difficulties in getting it published because she's a woman. And yeah, both of the openings to these movies, I think, are just terrific. Yeah, what do you guys think of Frankenstein?
Guess who watched Bride of Frankenstein for the first time today?
You did.
Me. But I've seen the first Frankenstein quite a while ago. But all 3 of these films, these are very fresh to me. In general, I've heard about the Boris Karloff Frankenstein all my life. Never watched the movie until maybe in the 2010s sometime. So very recent. All the other movies I've seen before, like in the 2000s, but you know what I mean. Still, it was a lot longer than Frankenstein was. So today marks the day that I've actually seen Bride of Frankenstein for the first time, and I was very surprised by that beginning. I was just like, what's going on?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
I was just starting with Frankenstein first, and going back to the question about Jack Pierce. The Frankenstein in the book is worlds apart from what you get in the film.
Yes.
The monster.
Yes.
And it's a tribute to Jack Pierce. As we said before about Lugosi, if you ask somebody to draw Frankenstein's monster, they're going to draw Jack Pierce's creation.
Yes,
that square head and the electrodes, not bolts, the electrodes, and the big boots and all the rest of it. Yep. That's nothing to do with Mary Shelley. That is Jack Pierce all over.
Yep.
And it's a testament to Pierce's skill and his vision. And I think it's still copyrighted. I don't think anyone but Universal can use it. Certainly Hammer couldn't use it when they made their first Frankenstein film, which is why Christopher Lee looks so different. I might be wrong. Somebody can clarify, but I'm fairly certain it certainly was copyrighted. I think it might still be. But
that's fascinating.
Don't quote me on it.
That's okay. I won't. But someone in the chat can go and look it up and let us know. There's something also really great about Frankenstein. It's that opening scene where there's a funeral, and there's this wonderful pan shot where the funeral going on, the preacher saying his words, and as everything pans over, you see the people, you see this very creepy Grim Reaper, this skeleton, and the guy holding the Grim. You see the Grim Reaper, and then the final shot lands on a Victor Frankenstein and Fritz.
Yeah.
You know, and it just sort of shows it's wonderful imagery, just showing you the sadness and the pain of death, you know, the nastiness of the, you know, and the horror of the Grim Reaper, but then the real horror comes after the Grim Reaper. Yes. And that is Dr. Frankenstein.
Here we go.
Absolutely. And it shows, I mean, that's the theme of the book, of the film.
Yes.
You know, you're alive, the people on the procession are alive, they're now commemorating death. And after death, after the Grim Reaper, there's Frankenstein.
Yes.
Who will try and reverse the whole process.
Yes.
It's fantastic. Yes. And all the way through that first film, there are references to life and death.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's certainly there's a skeleton in the lecture hall.
Yes.
That is used for comedic effect because it keeps bouncing up and down.
Yes.
You know, which of course is a dead thing being mobile.
Coming to life. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not subtle, but it's great. And I think Edward Van Sloan's his Dr. Waldman's office is filled. He's got a bookshelf filled with skulls.
He does. There's so many skulls.
It's just the idea that death is always around these people.
Yes.
And it's the one thing that Frankenstein's going to try and overcome.
Yes.
Nothing in this film is there by accident. Everything is there for a reason. And it's absolutely amazing.
To that point, there was a really interesting moment. I love finding these like little subtle bits, and there's an interesting bit in the classroom scene at the beginning. There's this close-up of the students, and I loved that one of the students in this movie is a woman.
Yes.
She's front and center. It really is a not so subtle but very good moment of demonstrating, you know, social change at that time. I mean, you know, women in university is a thing then, but not everywhere.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And the fact that you have this moment where you have a woman in a medical student, you know, in a 1931 movie, 1935 movie. Oh no, 1931. I'm getting confused with Bride of Frankenstein. I just thought was wonderful. I was like, this is great. Like, whoever did this, I hope they did it intentionally, because it was just what a cool thing to say. Oh, hey, that's a lady in the classroom studying to become a doctor. Oh, great, I can go become a doctor.
Yeah, and absolutely, and it's made even more powerful by the fact that after that woman, there's nothing quite like it again.
No,
in the film, because Elizabeth doesn't really do very much other than get bullied
she's
by
a bit of a wet
Karloff.
blanket. I'm not gonna lie.
She's a typical damsel in distress.
Yes,
that doesn't really. She never really seems to come alive for me. Although she comes, she comes far more alive than the love rival character, who bizarrely is called Victor, which is Frankenstein's name in the book, but in the film he's called Henry, and that takes a while.
That is so odd.
I don't know why. I get confused all the time, and it's actually really the most annoying things about the movie. Why did they do this? Gosh.
I don't know, because if you're new to it and you hear her talking about Victor, you think, well, hang on.
Yeah,
she's talking about the wrong fella.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh.
Yes.
But I don't know why they do. I don't know why they changed names like that. But
me neither. That one was weird to me. But I did love that scene. I think that the film's exploration of, I guess it really is a descent into madness, isn't it? It's God complex on overdrive, and
absolutely. Yeah.
And I love Colin Clives is just wonderful as Henry Frankenstein. Just wonderful. He's over dramatic. It's very like theatrical, I think, more so than some of the other Hammer characters, or not Hammer, god darn it, Universal characters. He is very, very, very over dramatic. It's very much exaggerated for what I would imagine a theater performance would almost be. But there's just he's just that level of crazy that you buy it. You buy into his madness, I think.
What I find fascinating about his performances, and it's the way the character is written in the script, is that in almost every other version of Frankenstein, from the book to Hammer to whatever, to Kenneth Branagh to whatever else, Frankenstein starts off with the best of intentions.
Yes.
And he starts off ambitious, yes, but sane. Whereas Colin Clive is pretty much mad from the get-go.
Yep.
A bit like the Invisible Man.
Yes.
And there's a great line where they go and see him because he's locked himself away in this laboratory. And they take his father, the Baron, who is there purely for comic relief.
Which I love. It nailed for some reason. It really works.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I'll come on to talk about some of the violence in the film. And when you get to that, you need this comic relief. My God, do you need it? But so Elizabeth and Victor and the Baron are there with him, and I think it's Edward Van Sloan who says to him, "You're mad."
Yes.
And he looks. There's a close up of Colin Clive, and he looks mad, and his response is, "I'm crazy, am I?
I'm crazy, am I?"
Yeah, and you think, "Yes, you are, Henry. You are.
Yes, Henry.
You've completely lost your mind." And what's interesting, and it's part of what we talked about earlier about the compactness of the storytelling.
Yes.
Because we don't really, to get the point, we don't really need to see Victor as an ambitious young man.
No.
Because we really want to see him building the creature, don't we?
Yes. Yes.
So
Absolutely.
what's great about this version is you're straight in.
Yeah.
To the, and then there's that great creation scene where the picture itself comes alive. The movie itself comes alive along with the creature. And Clive has that great line about, "Now I know what it's like to be God."
To be God. Yeah.
Which is delivered in... It's one of those lines that needs to be delivered in the way it's delivered because it is over theatrical. But I don't think you could say it in any other way and make it work.
No, absolutely. Yeah, this is the perfect way to portray this, especially, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a brilliant performance.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant performance.
I think as well, like once the monster enters the picture, there's a really interesting moment. There's two interesting moments with the monster when it kind of first appears. One, I love the fact that our first scene with the monster is him walking backwards into a room because he doesn't know how to walk. He doesn't know how to walk through a door. He's backwards. Everything about him is the reverse of humanity. And it's subtle, but I love that they do that. On top of that, I also find it fascinating that the monster doesn't really become a monster until it kills Fritz. And what's interesting about Fritz is it is almost like a nasty sibling rivalry. Fritz seems to be antagonistic and vile, and he is monstrous towards the monster, antagonizes the monster until the monster pushes back and kills him. And as a result, because this monster is backwards, it is the anti-human, it is then vilified from the beginning, and
which is a major theme of the book.
Yes.
The book, the monster in the books just questions why he's there at all, and what purpose he's meant to serve.
Yeah.
And when he realizes that his life is an absolute nightmare.
Yes.
And he says, "Well, I never wanted to be here,"
Yes.
And it's all the sort of adolescent angst that everyone goes through. You say, "Well, I never asked to be born."
Yes.
Why is all this stuff happening to me?
Yes.
That when Frankenstein turns his back on him, he has that same sort of,
yes,
"Well, I'll make your life a misery then as well." So he's more sinned against than sinning is the idea of the book, and that comes across, whilst not to the letter, it certainly comes to the spirit in the film.
Yes.
And you're right, it starts with Fritz,
Yes.
but it's and Fritz is just a bully. He's
He
just
so he's
Oh
not
yeah.
liable.
Oh, nasty.
you know,
Not just
once he realizes that the creature is frightened of fire,
Mm.
he's never not got a torch in his hand. You know?
Yes.
And there's a great when he is frightening him with fire and taunting him with it, the screen just goes black.
Mm.
And what strikes me, you've no idea how long that goes on for
Yes.
before the creature does retaliate.
Yes.
You know, and
Yes.
that could be suffering unmeasurable
Yes.
sort of torment before it
Yes.
finally turns.
Yes.
And then when they go back into the room, they hear Fritz scream. They go back into the room,
Yep.
and he's just hanging there.
Yes.
You know, from the rafter,
Mm.
and the monster's cowering. It's
Yes.
well, it's difficult to not think, well, you deserved that, Fritz. I'm
Oh,
afraid.
exactly.
You know? Another great Dwight Fry performance, by the way.
Oh, yes. Yes. And I think it was what the other bit that I quite love. There's so much that I love about this movie, but we have 3 to discuss, so I can't, go super deep into everything. But there is something just great about the standoff, I think, between the two at the end in the windmill. The fact that it's Frankenstein is sort of come out of his madness, but the legacy of the horror that he's created is now going to forever haunt his family. Something that carries on into film 2 and into film 3 that I find fascinating, and it's essentially almost destroys his future. That scene at the end where the monster throws Frankenstein off the windmill. He smacks onto one of the arms of the mill and then lands on the ground. It's really quite violent. That whole scene is quite violent and grim, because not only is that happening, but then when the windmill catches on fire and you hear the horrific screams of the monster who's being, what you assume is being burnt alive as this thing begins to topple.
Yeah. Well,
God.
I'd not really made this connection. I don't think I've seen this reference before at all, really. But it struck me that the end of Frankenstein is pretty much frame for frame the end of The Wicker Man.
Yeah.
Oh wow,
it's true.
Because he's trapped in a burning construct, screaming for his life.
Yes.
Well, all the apparently normal people are ignoring him.
Yes.
Yeah. And that only struck me when I rewatched it for the purpose of this. I thought, well, this is exactly the same. And you do see the windmill start to collapse as you see the Wicker Man start to collapse.
Yes. Oh my God, that's true. That has to be. That can't be a coincidence. That can't be a coincidence.
I wouldn't have thought so.
No.
There must be some sort of reference to it. I mean,
yeah,
it is
I'm
a
sure it's out
coincidence,
there
a
somewhere.
remarkable one. But
Yes.
it's one of those things that I've not seen before. But now I've seen it, I won't ever not see it. If you know what I mean.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So I just wanted to touch on the violence.
Oh,
yes. You talked about throwing Frankenstein onto the blades of the windmill.
Yes.
There are loads of things, and the Universal films were quite perverse in many ways. I mean, there's the famous Lugosi flaying Karloff alive in the Black Cat. It's all done in silhouette. I mean, that is a perversely violent idea.
Yes.
And Frankenstein's got its own share, its fair share of it. You know, that when the monster's strangling Frankenstein for one of the first times, there's absolute viciousness in it.
Oh yeah.
You know, but the famous thing is the girl in the lake.
Yes.
That
girl.
is. Yeah.
And what strikes me about that is it was obviously cut for years. And it's proof to me that censors don't always know what they're doing. Because if you rarely know what they're doing.
Yes.
Because if you watch that scene and if you keep that scene in and you see him throw her into the lake, you understand that he's done it not by accident, but not understanding the consequences.
Yes. He thinks she'll float like the little petals.
He thinks she'll float like the flowers. And if you cut it out, as they did,
Mm-hmm.
you see him wither, and then it cuts to her body being carried through the village,
Yes.
and people saying he's a murderer.
Yes.
So, in order to sort of make it, in order to save us from the horror of this girl going in the lake, they end up making it even worse because they make him a mad child killer.
Yes.
And that robs the whole movie of the point, and it robs the whole Frankenstein story of its point, which is he is not the villain. The villain are the people around him.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
That
and
was
it's one of the most ludicrous cuts in cinema history.
yes.
And thank God it was restored. Because
Yeah.
the whole purpose of James Whale's Frankensteins, to me,
Mhm.
is that, like we said before, you are the villain. The so-called respectable man in the street and woman in the street are the villains.
Mm.
This poor creature had no idea. He doesn't know what anything is.
Yeah.
And just because you don't understand him, and because he's a bit different,
Yeah.
you're going to vilify him and
Yes.
and destroy him.
Yes.
And that says something. That is still a pertinent theme today.
Yes. I wonder. Do you remember? Do you remember when that scene was restored?
I don't, to be honest.
Because what's fascinating to me is, as I was doing my rewatch as well, when you get to the Son of Frankenstein, there is the inspector of the town who has a false arm, because as a child, the monster apparently stormed into his house. His parents tried to stop the monster, and the monster apparently grabbed the kid by the arm and ripped his arm off, basically. Which is interesting because obviously what we see of the monster in the very first Frankenstein movie is, nowadays, because that scene is in there, he's not murdering the little girl. He's trying to play with the kid. So I'm assuming that the whole character of the inspector in Son of Frankenstein is a hangover from the fact that original scene was cut and the monster was a murderer of.
Just on a quick surreptitious check, and it was in the 80s.
Okay, then, yeah, definitely.
Wow.
So that bears out what you're saying. That the idea of for all those years, the monster will have been the psychopathic child killer.
Yes.
Which is just misses the point completely.
Yes. Oh, I absolutely. I completely agree. Because he's looking for friendship. And I think she's kind to him. The kid is kind to him.
Yeah.
And he wants to play. He wants something to be kind to him, and he wants to be kind to other things.
That's right.
And that theme is really picked up nicely in the second movie.
Cutting that scene only achieves shifting sympathy to the mob.
Yes, it does.
Than to the victim of the mob, and it's just madness to have cut it.
Absolutely. So I think what's so great, one of the things I love about Bride of Frankenstein is the fact that it picks up right where Frankenstein left off, in a very sort of, I mean, we see this in films quite often now. I mean, the Bourne Ultimatum picks up right after the Bourne Supremacy, almost seamlessly, which is wonderful. Quantum of Solace picks up directly after Casino Royale.
Halloween 2.
Halloween 2.
The original Halloween 2, not the Rob Zombie one, picks up.
Right. Yep.
The same night as Halloween 1978.
Yep. So there's it. That's a really interesting, thing in cinematic, trick that they did with this movie. That I don't know if it's the first. It might be. But I loved it. And our reintroduction to the monster is, again, this time around, I seem to become more aware of things, and the monster looks different in the second one because he's been burnt. He's almost burnt alive. So his hair is charred and gone almost. He has no eyebrows. His skin is bubbly, and he's even more horrific, I think, as a result. And the fact that he's now more horrific, and then goes on the run. He's loose and trying to get away. And the beginning of the movie, I think, is the weakest, if I'm honest. I think when they kind of rehash the chasing of the monster, locking the monster up, there is aspects of that I'm kind of like, well, we've seen all this in the first movie. We don't need. I guess they needed another mob scene, and so they just thought, let's put the mob scene at the beginning of the movie. To me, I don't really think it needed that, but whatever. Because I love the fact, like, I would have been fine if he gets out of the destruction and then just goes straight to the blind man's house. You know?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of it is just 4 years have passed.
Yes, true.
We've got to remind people what happened, and
yes,
but there are even in that. I mean, it's very perfunctory. I agree with you on that. That you do think, well, we've seen this, we know what happened.
Yes.
I think a lot of it's just scene setting.
Yes, but the Mary Shelley scene. Yeah, but the Mary Shelley scene does a wonderful job of recapping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why I was like, you don't need this beginning chase. You don't need it, guys.
I agree. There is a great little reversal though, which is when they bring in. I mean, it doesn't actually quite follow on, I don't think, because the first Frankenstein ends with Henry in bed with Elizabeth tending him.
I think there's an unmentioned time jump.
Yeah, because the Bride starts with him being carried from the windmill.
Yes.
Back into the but there's a great little reversal because one of the characters carrying Henry in says he's alive.
Yeah, I love that. I watched that today. Yes, and I was just like, yeah.
It's almost like a riff, because then Henry shouts, "She's alive! She's alive!"
Yes.
So that's a nice sort of carry through of one of the motifs of the film. It's fantastic.
I do love that. I love that a lot. What are your thoughts on Pretorius?
Well, he's incredible, isn't he?
He is.
He's great.
We mentioned Tim Burton before. I was slightly segueing, but we mentioned Tim Burton before, and I think this is perhaps the first example of what happened when Warner Brothers said to Tim Burton after Batman, "As long as you make another Batman film, you can do what you like."
Yeah,
and he's great, and he makes a Tim Burton film with Batman in it. This I think Universal said to James Whale, "Make another Frankenstein film, and you can do what you want with it." So he says, "Okay, here we go."
Yep.
Because it is so subversive, and it's. Pretorius. There's no denying what Pretorius is. There's no denying what Pretorius wants. He's definitely the villain of the piece.
You say what he is. What is he? What is he?
Well, he's an overly camp homosexual lunatic.
Okay. Yeah. I was going the way I sort of viewed him as he is, because Henry is sort of snapped out of his lunacy. He doesn't want to do any more of this stuff. I kind of saw Pretorius. I agree with your assessment of what he is. But in addition to that, I do think that he is also maybe the dark mirror version, the Star Trek mirror universe. He is the mirror version of what Henry Frankenstein would have become had he continued.
I also think he's one of those characters that you often see, who is the person who wants what the hero has achieved but couldn't quite do it himself.
Yes. Oh yes.
So he's able to create life, but they're these bizarre miniature kings and queens, in demijohn.
I couldn't believe it when I was watching that movie.
What is this?
Right?
Yeah.
He's never quite managed to do it. I bet you any money he's tried.
Oh,
he's never quite been able to do it full size, and Henry's done that. So he's instantly on to Henry. I can't think of another example, but the sort. Together we could be.
Oh yes,
sort of thing,
Yes,
and Henry's fighting.
It's Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker.
It's Green Goblin and Spider-Man.
Yeah, absolutely.
You.
And Pretorius has this great line about. I mean, he's filled with great lines. He's a fabulous villain.
Yes.
When he's talking about God and the Bible, and he does it in a really sneering, as if the Bible is just a fairy tale.
Yes.
And he says, I grew my creatures like cultures. I grew them as nature does from seed.
Yes. Yes.
That is really perverse.
Yes. Yes. I think what was one of the most fascinating things for me with this movie was the monster's journey, I think.
Especially when he went into that cabin, man.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. I think him meeting the blind man and developing this friendship. There's something quite fascinating about the blind man, and that is he's a disabled individual. He's cut off from society. He's completely alone. He has no friends. The monster is the exact same as him, but for different reasons. Mm-hmm. And you know, the monster is rightfully so apprehensive at first when he meets the blind man. And because what's fascinating is there's so much talk of God and creation and you know, perversion of creation, and it's ironically it's Christian kindness by a blind man who's been completely ignored by society.
Yeah, I've always thought there are three main themes, I think, in this film. And one is I certainly think homosexuality is one, because Whale was openly gay.
Yeah.
At a time when it was pretty brave to be openly gay. You know? One is obviously necrophilia, because the monster a dead thing wants a mate.
Yes.
But religion and sacrilege, sacrilege particularly.
Well, who wants to create the mate?
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, ironically, the one person who doesn't is Henry.
Well, yes. Yes.
He gets swayed, but I think he's swayed most when Pretorius uses the monster to convince him. You know.
Yes. Well, it's when he kidnaps Elizabeth. Elizabeth being kidnapped.
That's right. Yeah.
Is the motivation.
He's blackmailed into it.
Yeah.
But sacrilege, because there's the great scene when he's in the hermit's cabin. The hermit prays over him, thanking God for sending him a friend.
Yes.
And the crucifix stays alight as the scene.
It does. Yes.
But that is juxtaposed completely with the sort of quasi crucifixion of the monster when he's tied to the log.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he's in that sort of pose.
Yes.
And all the crowd are baying for him. You know.
Yes.
That I don't think it's possible to watch that scene and not be reminded of Christ's crucifixion. It's just with the crowd baying for it to happen as well.
Yes. Yes.
And that sort of permeates, that sacrilege permeates all the way through. So that, you know, it's almost as if Whale's saying, well, the theme of the first one was going against God. So what we'll do now is go against God completely.
Yes.
You know? And the fact he managed to get all that past the censors is amazing. It's incredible. I mean,
it really is. It really is. The censors probably saw the cabin scene and thought, "No, this is a really good message. Everything is fine." That's probably what they thought.
Yeah, we'll overlook the fact that they crucify the monster. You know?
Yes, and again, it's one of those terrific moments where these monster movies, you know, we call them monster movies, and they're sort of like, it's almost quite flippant, but gosh, there's so much depth in these stories.
Well, who is the monster?
It's man. I mean, it's plain and simple. The real monsters in all of this is, I remember writing that down in my notes when I was watching this. I was like, you know, at no point have I viewed the monster as the monster. The monster is everybody else. And I think, again, it's wonderful. The ending, God, I love the ending of this movie. I love the creation of the bride. I love that the bride is Mary Shelley.
Yeah.
Or rather the actor who plays Mary Shelley.
Again, I think Charles Laughton's wife.
Oh, right, yes.
Elsa
also,
Sanchez.
what I also found, just, this is one of those things where it's subtly horrific, but where do they get her body? You know, he sends his guys out to just find a woman and fucking murder her and bring her to me.
They did that for the heart.
That's what Pretorius wants. Yes.
Yeah.
Find a young woman, kill her, give me that heart. And it's just, you know,
They get the
again,
body.
Go on.
Sorry, they get the body from a teenage girl's tomb.
Yes.
On top of which, after they've stolen the body,
Oh god.
Pretorius treats himself to a nice little picnic.
Oh, it's so horrific.
And eats off the top of the tomb.
Yes.
This is and again, it's the theme of the.
Mm-hmm.
It's the theme of the film, which is that man is better than life.
Yes.
And better than death.
Yes.
Because this doesn't matter.
Yes.
All it is a table for my sandwiches, cheese, and wine.
Yes.
I mean, that is a strong, strong statement to make, you know.
Yeah.
And it's done. I think part of the reason that Pretorius works so well is that everything is so outrageous, so that no matter how dark that is, it's somehow made even worse by the glee with which he does it.
Oh gosh.
It's all disinterest of where he is.
Yes.
You know?
Well, he tells the guys, he's like, he's like, you guys can go. I'm gonna stay down here for a while. I like it.
I like it down here. He says.
Oh god.
And he says some things about don't give me any. You know, we don't need to talk about any of this nonsense about angels. Let's talk about the devils instead. He says.
Yes.
And it's just he's a perverse character, and what a great villain he is.
Yes.
But
no,
the whole idea of just going out and murdering a girl for a heart.
Jeez.
You know, I mean that's up in the ante, because at least Henry only took dead
from
things.
the dead. Yes.
You know?
Yes.
There's a bit of Burke and Hare in there.
Yes.
Me,
yes.
You know, getting bodies for medical study just by killing them.
Yes.
Killing them
absolutely. Jeez. Yeah. No, I thought that was just when you think about what's really going on. When you're like, this is really dark. This is.
Yeah, it's
so dark.
It's a much darker film than Frankenstein, which is dark enough.
Yes.
But it's a much darker film, and like I say, a much more subversive film.
Yes.
And
speaking of the you know, what we were talking about last week or a couple weeks ago with the noir stuff and the amount of darkness and letting the light in, there was the scene in which they bring the bride to life, I think is terrific. The way that they contrast the light and the dark, the quick snaps between Henry and Pretorius, and just how wicked one looks and kind of nervous and frightened the other one looks as this is happening. It's so chaotic. And
there's
so
a great shot of Pretorius from sort of above.
Yes.
And he looks inhuman.
He does.
His hair's all over the place. That great shock of white hair's all over the place. His eyebrows are arched.
Yes.
And just the way he's lit from below makes him. I mean, there's the monster of the Bride of Frankenstein in all.
Yes.
Yes.
You know,
absolutely.
But the rest of it is just a sad, like you say, a sad sort of persecution of a deformed or disabled innocent.
Yes.
It's heartbreaking. It
is, and it only gets worse because at the end, when the bride is finally there, and she rejects the monster, another monster has rejected. A monster has, an abomination has rejected another abomination.
Yeah,
there is just no hope.
There's no hope, no. But what I love about that is that it's the monster who ends up with the overall power of life and death.
Yes.
Ooh.
Henry's tried it. Pretorius has tried it.
Yep.
But in the end, the one who suffered the most has the final say.
Yes.
And that is if that's not a powerful shock to your gut, then I don't think you've any sort of feeling at all, really. Because
I agree.
It's almost a cheer out moment, that.
Yes.
When he says, "You go."
Yes.
Live. You live. We belong dead.
Yes. Yeah. That was a triumphant moment. I thought that what a way
to try to do it, and he succeeds in achieving it. He achieves what neither of them could do, and that is decide who dies and who lives. It's a magnificent moment.
Yes.
And it's a great end to a great film.
Oh, it is. It is. It's one of those few moments in which the sequel matches and elevates
Yeah.
The first one. There are a few film trilogies that do this, and I think this is, the first one. I mean, really to do it, because I don't know what other trilogies were out at this time. The Dracula trilogy hadn't been completed by this point. So yeah. But then we get to the final film we're going to talk about, which is the Son of Frankenstein. Came out in 1939, so like 4 or 5 years later. It is a slightly different movie to the first two, but the legacy of 1 and 2 is all over the place. Those fingerprints are there,
Totally,
which I really liked. Again, it's much longer. It's like 2 hours and a bit, I think. Music is ramped up, whereas again the first 2 Frankenstein movies, like the Dracula and Invisible Man and stuff like that, were very silent, very they were made eerie by the fact that things were, you were hearing the creaks and the groans and the footsteps and the rustle of leaves. Yeah,
I think part of sorry, Luke. I think part of it is that in the 1930, what's Dracula and Frankenstein
31.
I think I'm right in saying this, that there was a sense that music in film was a hark back to the silent era.
Yeah,
maybe.
Because it filled in the dialogue. So they felt that keeping music in would have somehow been taking a step back when they're taking this massive step forward.
Yeah,
I can't remember where I read that, but I'm sure someone said that.
And
so it may be that was a conscious choice, that they thought we're not going to do it.
I feel like that's the case too. Yeah,
certainly. I'm sure it is. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. It really does, actually.
Because like this little movie called King Kong came out in between, and that had a full score. I think that was one of the main, not the only one, but I think that was one of those films that kind of changed things in a way when it comes to music and film. Because
so I think by the time you get to 1939, I think this is it.
Yes, 39. Yeah,
music's sort of come back in.
Yeah.
And it's sort of
loud and bombastic at times.
Loud and bombastic. Yeah. And it becomes
that
universal fanfare at the start, which starts to happen in every Universal film.
Yes.
Dun, 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 that one.
Yeah. That's Indiana Jones, sir. That's Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Is what you were doing.
Well, it was, yes. That's right.
It's the dun dun.
Yeah. It's
that's from 1997. Come on.
But anyway, that's what it is. That's what it is. Anyway, anywho, Basil Rathbone stars as the son of Victor Frankenstein, Wolf von Wolf, or whatever his name is. And this is, if am I right in thinking this is the first moment of Igor.
Yes,
Igor.
Yes. It's funny that again we're 3 films in, and the classic things that we associate with Frankenstein are still being created. You think of Frankenstein, you think of the monster, you think of Igor, played by Bela Lugosi.
Who steals it?
Who steals?
He's got the main character.
What a character trait to have, that you were hanged, survived, but your neck is broken like this. What a character trait to have.
Yeah,
I mean, that is just superb. Yes. What a gift to an actor that is.
Yes. I think what I loved about the beginning of this movie is the fact that Frankenstein's son is coming back with his wife and child to where his family legacy is. From being in were they in London or in the States? I can't remember where they were coming from now. But this is no homecoming. I love the fact that not only do the people not want a Frankenstein back because of the legacy of the horrors that are associated with him and with his father in the creation of the monster. So they don't want him back for that particular reason. I had a second reason. It's just completely gone out of my mind. Gosh, dang it. It was a real good one too. Anyway, I love the fact that they don't want them back, and that tension rides throughout the whole film of
Yeah.
of being unwelcome
Yeah,
throughout
definitely.
throughout the process.
I think very, very slightly,
Mm.
it's a bit sort of it suffered a bit from Young Frankenstein, which is the same plot.
Yes. Wait, when did Young Frankenstein came out? That didn't come out.
Gene Wilder from the 70s?
Yeah, in the 70s, but the plot is almost the same as Son of Frankenstein.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see. Right. Right.
So
right.
it suffers a little bit that when you've seen Young Frankenstein, you go back and watch Son of Frankenstein, you do sort of start smiling a little bit.
Okay, well that's good because I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, Young Frankenstein is terrific.
I need to see it. Yeah. Everyone tells me to see it. Still didn't see it.
But you're right. There is the overriding sense that they are not welcome. And there's the scene when they arrive at the train station and everyone's saying, "Go home."
Yes.
We don't want you here. You know. And only Basil Rathbone has he has it in almost. He certainly has it in Robin Hood, and he has it as Sherlock Holmes. This sort of aloof haughtiness. He can look down that magnificent nose and say, "Well, I don't really care what you think." And he does that all the way through.
Yes.
But he wants to try and make the best of the situation, really.
Yes.
But and I think I'm right in saying he doesn't want to get involved in any of it. He doesn't want to have anything to do with.
Correct. He's very much anti getting involved with anything to do with his father's experiments. Assures everyone that he's not into that kind of stuff.
I'm not doing any of that stuff. And then gradually.
Not into it.
Seduced by it. He gets drawn into it.
Yes, he gets that letter from his. There's the debate in this town hall that the mayor is ordered to give a packet of information to him from his father.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what sends him on the way. And it's interesting because it's almost saying that this madness is almost hereditary. This wicked legacy, it just carries on from Frankenstein to Frankenstein.
Yeah, there's a definite sense of that.
And
there's a definite sense that it will corrupt. That they're bound. They're sort of a bit like the Wolfman. They're cursed by it. They're never going to be able to stop trying to make this idea work.
Yes,
and it will inevitably drive them all mad.
Yes,
or worse.
Yes,
and there's the bit where he burns the word monsters off the crypt.
Yes.
And writes the word men.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that is such a powerful moment.
Yes. Yes.
And one of those moments that you get every now and again, or in the best films you get every now and again, where the whole essence of the movie is summed up in either a phrase, an action, or an exchange of words or something, and that is the essence of the Frankenstein story.
Yes,
not monsters, we're men. But as we've said before, men are the monsters. So you're in a catch-22 there, Basil. I'm afraid.
Yep. No, it's true. I think the other thing that's really interesting about this is as Basil Rathbone's character is slowly getting obsessed in trying to recreate his father's experiments, and heal the monster, bring the monster back to life. There then becomes this interesting. There's a subtle detective story going on with the inspector. The inspector is starting to become suspicious of what he is doing, and watching him trying to figure out this stuff. I mean, there's this wonderful moment where Frankenstein's boy mentions the giant, the furry giant or whatever that comes to see him.
Yes.
And the kid makes the comment, "Oh, like something like he took me by the arm or had me by the arm," and the inspector automatically shoots over and grabs his fake arm. Sort of PTSD like moment, as we discussed, is likely a carryover from the original film where we assume the monster was a murderer of children. But also interesting, this third film is subverting that, and Frankenstein the monster rather is playing with the son of Frankenstein and has no interest in killing the son.
Mm.
Even though the first film does suggest it in its original release. This film is maybe trying to redeem that in some way.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, and especially since that at the time that this was released, that scene with Maria at the lake would have been cut.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect they are probably trying to say you'll redress some of the balance, I suppose.
Yes. Yes.
Because there is, the child is intensely annoying.
Yes.
It's bad. It's bad.
Yeah. I'm not gonna argue.
But you sort of just have to accept that for what it is, I suppose.
Yes. No, I agree.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that the monster has at last found a friend.
That's the thing. He has found a friend. He's been out and about for however many decades, not really murdered anyone. There's no real badness that's going on. It's just him and Igor are living as it's almost, again, it's sort of like Igor is almost like the inverse of the blind man.
He is. Yeah,
he wants to be his friend, but he is, unlike the blind man, he is vengeful and evil and manipulative and nasty, which is a very fun take, I think, to have on that particular friend of the monsters.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. He because he is in his own way. Again, he's a monster in his own right. He's Igor.
Yes.
And he's a bizarre-looking creation.
Awesome.
He has a magnificent scene in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I love that. That's
really
like
over the top. Lugosi is really clearly having the time of his life. Lugosi.
Yep.
But yeah, you're right. There is this sense that there's a definite sense that time has passed since the last film or the last.
I remembered my thought. So sorry. Not only do they not want him to come back to the town, but also the town is in complete, like, it's almost derelict. It's completely poor and ostracized because of the legacy of Frankenstein, which is why they don't want him to come back. That was something else. That's what I was going to say earlier.
Yeah, that's absolutely
Carry on,
right.
Matthew.
Yeah. That ties in nicely, because I was saying there's a sense that time has passed.
Yes.
So the monster's been, to paraphrase what you just said, Luke, he's been out and about and he's managed not to kill anybody. He's got this sort of semi partnership with Igor.
Yes.
The town's gone to rack and ruin because of the curse of Frankenstein.
Yes.
It's the sense that it's the same place from the earlier films, but the passage of time has had an effect.
Yes.
So then the ultra modern Rathbone and his family come in, because they are ultra modern.
Yes.
They are a sense, this is either going to get worse or it's going to get better. Yeah. He might be a philanthropist. He might start rebuilding the town. But he obviously doesn't. He goes the other way. But you're right. They are absolutely hostile.
Yes.
To him.
Yes.
Just on account of his name, and again, alienated through no fault of his own.
Yes. Yes. And where does that alienation lead him? Is that the reason why he is so vehement about carrying on his father's legacy? He goes to the tomb. He sees his father's grave. He sees what the vandals have written on it, and reads his father's information. And his whole purpose then becomes about almost vindicating his father, who he believes was a good man.
Yeah, that's right. And he has. I mentioned before that you don't see Colin Clive's Frankenstein having the good intentions that the book Frankenstein has.
Yeah.
But you do sort of hear, because Rathbone's character gets into the mess he does because he does want to vindicate his father.
Yeah.
He wants to give his father some sense of justice, because his father is now seen as a monster and a villain.
Yes.
And Frankenstein says he was neither of those things.
Yes.
So I want to do right by him, give him some sort of justice.
Yes.
but we all know,
Yeah.
and Rathbone's character doesn't yet know, that it's a road to failure. It's doomed to fail, the plan, because
Yes.
you can't do what Frankenstein wanted to do.
Yes. And I think what I love about it is, even though it's not finite in the grand scheme of things, we do get a quite wonderful death
Yeah.
for the monster.
Yeah.
Dropping into a pit of sulfur. Which, if I think about, because we've sort of talked about echoes where these films are echoed in modern films. There is something very Terminator 2 about his death.
Oh yes, yeah, there is.
The monster is continues to try to do sort of good-ish, in some way. And that death is again very, very reminiscent, I think, of that movie, in which the Terminator goes down into the whatever that molten goop is. That is the final end for this, a brutal end for a brutal creation, I think.
Yeah.
And a brutal end to a horrific legacy. Which is what I loved about the Son of Frankenstein, is it's so much about legacy. That it sums up and concludes so wonderfully the first two movies, those first two acts, and this is a wonderful third act.
It is a great third act.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely loved it. And I've always loved it. It's it doesn't really hang on, again, like, contemporary films. There's a lot of, use Terminator franchise as an example. Everything is a goddamn callback. You think of Terminator Genesis, or Genesis, as this is meant to be called. The beginning is a shot for shot imitation of the first Terminator film. There's so many member berries, so many Easter eggs, so much just in your face. Remember the better stuff. What I love really about these older movies, these older monster movies, this first cinematic universe, is very, very lightly are we being reminded about the past. Sure, 5 years have passed since the first movie to the second movie, so therefore this wonderful introduction gives you a very quick recap. And these wonderful little Easter eggs of he's alive, she's alive. Like, that's fun stuff. But you're not sitting there seeing shot for shot imitations, of certain things. That is a sense of progression, not regression by hanging on to the nostalgia of what's come. There is a progress to the legacy, to the characters, that I love about this particular trilogy, that I think modern films, particularly those after sort of around 2010, have lost.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a sense of, accepting that your audience has got something between their ears, to be perfectly frank.
Yes.
That you don't have to spoon feed them every piece of information.
No.
So
No.
That seems to be something that filmmakers on occasion seem to think is necessary these days.
Yes.
But these films don't. These films say, you'll get this.
Yes.
You will understand this. Just go with the flow.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to return to something about wrapping it all up, because Son of Frankenstein, I think I'm right in saying he leaves the keys to the castle behind.
Yes.
To the town, so that's sort of, that's almost sort of Batman hanging up his cape,
Yes.
He's sort of saying, there you go. You can only you now can access the castle.
Yes.
Do what you will.
Yes.
And they cheer him as he leaves. So there's a great circular arc to the story. He arrives to booze and condemnation and leaves a hero. And it's
yes.
It's an end, because that he's not going to come back.
No.
So the whole thing has come to a satisfactory conclusion, which is the point you were making about the Terminators. That
yes,
that Terminator 2 certainly is the end of that story. Quite why they felt the need to go on again is beyond me, really.
Yes. I mean, Terminator 2 is the end. Nothing else counts after Terminator 2.
No, absolutely not.
Nothing.
Absolutely not.
But it's ironic, I guess, because then after the Son of Frankenstein, you do get 2 more reappearances of the monster in the sort of what would be the Avengers style crossover of the House of Frankenstein and the House of Dracula.
Yeah, I think that Son of Frankenstein is the shift for me.
Yes.
Into the what comes after.
Yes.
So we're talking about the Wolfman being much more loud and music and
yes.
Because gone after Son of Frankenstein, the German expressionism and the sort of cinematic touches, they disappear really.
Yeah.
And they become much more studio vehicles.
Yes.
They're no less entertaining for it. And they are certainly no less well made for it. No. Because the budget for some of these films must have been minuscule.
Probably.
Yeah.
But they use every penny is there and it's used well. Whereas too often films have massive budgets and they're overblown and bloated. Yes. These films are the opposite,
Yes.
But there is a definite sense that they become much more B-movie.
Yes.
In their status.
Yes.
They become much more formulaic, I suppose, as they go on.
Yeah.
Whereas the originals, the Draculas and the Frankensteins, the Mummies, all had flashes of genius.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think as well this sort of shift is highlighted again. I think we said it before we started recording. This shift after this is almost an indication of kind of what's going on now with current cinematic universes, and that is they get tired, they get boring, they lose originality. You eventually get Frankenstein and Wolfman meeting Abbott and Costello and all that kind of stuff, and it becomes a comedy, becomes silly.
Silly, yeah.
And what is Marvel? It's nothing but silliness now. It's just schlock.
The Universal horrors do fall into the trap that films like the Marvel ones and superhero films generally do.
Yeah.
In that, well, how do we make the next one bigger?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll stick the Wolfman in this one.
Yes.
Oh, well, how do we make it even bigger next time? We'll put Dracula in next time.
Yeah.
And in the end, you've got 5 or 6 monsters, say.
Yeah.
All fighting for a screen runtime of 70 minutes. So where's your story?
Yes.
You've got to give them all. I mean, that's what the Avengers did. The first Avengers film did very well.
Did very well.
They all had a fair amount of screen time, and there was a story to be told, and they all banded together. That was good.
Yes.
But I haven't watched a Marvel film for a long time. But I do feel that there is a bit of too many people and not enough plot.
Yeah.
And that certainly does become the case. The plots are very simple in the Universal horrors. I mean, Larry Talbot wants a cure. Somebody tells him that the blood of Dracula will give him the cure. For some reason, Dracula wants the Frankenstein monster. I can't remember why.
Yeah.
So they're all in there for a reason.
Yeah.
But it's not really a reason that makes any sense to anybody that's paying any attention closely.
No, because he finds Frankenstein's monster. Yeah, he finds Frankenstein's monster frozen in the castle. Well, last time we saw the monster, it was in a puddle of sulfur. So,
so that continuity has been lost completely. Frankenstein and Bride, they are clearly the same people.
Yes,
and time has moved on, and they have suffered as a result. I mean, Henry Frankenstein in Bride has almost certainly got PTSD.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like you said, the monster is burnt and charred, and the hair's gone, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But the monster, there's no explanation or sign of that in any of the later ones.
Mm-hmm.
They're just sort of stock characters by then.
Yeah, stock characters that they just.
I suppose the only excuses you could use is Frankenstein's son in Son of Frankenstein does say that the monster is indestructible. He does make a passing comment about that, so you could go with that. But I'm like, nah, the sulfur was the end. That was the end.
Yeah,
Give it a rest. Give it a rest.
But yeah,
I mean, I do think these later ones they are fun. They are certainly fun. They've got bags of charm, but there is less. I think there's less depth to them.
yes,
In the sort of depth we've been talking about in the Frankenstein's, Dracula, and the Wolfman, and the Invisible Man. There's less of that sort of 2-level storytelling going on. It is just a monster fest.
yes,
That's all it is.
yes.
And so what? Sometimes all you need is a 72-minute monster fest.
Yes.
Sometimes it's great.
Sometimes that's all you need. After a strenuous day.
Yes. But I think it's safe to say that the Universal monsters are really the first truly great cinematic universe that, like all cinematic universes, eventually get tired and peter out. And I think we're in the process of seeing some petering out of current cinematic universes. But I tell you what, to this day there are very few monsters that are as iconic as this group of monsters. Some of them are iconic because of literature. Some of them are iconic because literature mixed with what these films have done with them, and some of them are just iconic because of this right here. You know what I mean?
And I think they lasted so long because of the strength of their story.
Yeah, no, I think so. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting, I think, that despite some attempts to do so, they can't be resurrected.
No.
Any attempt to remake these films has pointedly failed. So you look at films like that awful Van Helsing film, and
I liked it.
Tom Cruise Mummy film, and things like that. They haven't worked, and it's because there was a particular melting pot of magic, I think, that was director, writer, star, right place, right time, right vehicle.
Yes.
And there is some cinema magic that you can't recapture because you can't get it in a bottle.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Absolutely.
But yeah, they're wonderful, wonderful films. Let me just pull up the picture that Phil was drawing.
That I was drawing this entire
whole time. Give me 2 seconds, and we'll wrap this puppy up. This was our second longest stream. The last
second
one,
longest. Maybe it's our longest. Do you think?
It might be the longest. Maybe. We kind of were. It's rivaling the episode that we did with Nadine Matheson, where we did a big She-Hulk smash and bash. But
there we go.
Here we go. We got the wonderful moments from the Bride of Frankenstein.
And just one more point about the Bride. Yeah. And going back to the question about
never has a zombie woman been more attractive.
She's on screen for about 3 minutes,
but she's an icon.
She's an icon, and that again is that's Jack Pierce.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the hair, the look, everything about the way they did her was just. It's one of those moments like, bam. History was made with that moment.
It's performance as well, of course.
God, yes.
But fundamentally, that is Jack Pierce's work, and that's why he was bordering on genius.
Yes.
Oh, totally.
Yes. I mean, because honestly, how long could this particular character realistically be in this movie without it being hokey? She, really could only really should only exist for a short period of time. But that small amount of time that they use her, dear gosh.
No, absolutely. Everyone
absolutely
remember.
Do use her.
Yeah.
It's genius. Absolutely genius. Love it. There we go, guys. That is this concludes our Halloween special.
Ooh.
Matthew, it was great to have you back.
Absolutely.
These monster movies. We'll definitely have you back. We discussed a few ideas earlier about a particular the world's famous detective and some TV shows that he might have been the star of, and
totally
maybe discussing those at some point in the future. We're obviously back next.
Always happy to talk about the world's greatest detective.
There we go. We are back next
Batman,
Wednesday.
right?
Same bat channel, same bat time. Next week we're bringing on author Derek B. Miller, author of Norwegian by Night and American by Day, and How to Find Your Way in the Dark, and a bunch of other really, really good books. It's going to be an interesting conversation where we're going to be discussing the question of the death of heroes and stories, looking at sort of what storytelling used to be like versus what modern day stories are like, and wondering and pondering, are modern day movies and books and things of that nature, storytelling in general, is it letting people down? So you'll have to come and listen to our chat about that, people.
Yeah. Wednesday.
But there we go.
Sounds excellent.
Yeah, it'd be good. And also, don't forget, go buy Matthew's books. Matthew, remind me the name of your books real quick.
The one that's out at the minute is called A Talent for Murder. It's the first in the Everett Carr mysteries. The second one is out in January. That's called The Dangers of This Night.
Nice.
And there'll be a third next year called A Killing Amongst the Dead.
Ah, there you go.
Nice.
There you go.
So yeah, available on Amazon. So please do check them out if you like a good old-fashioned detective story.
Yes, go buy and review, people. Go buy and review.
Yes,
Won't
please.
be disappointed. Cool. All right, everyone. Good night.
Thanks for having me on again, chaps. It's been really good fun.
It's been awesome having you on. Loved hearing all your insights on all these movies.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun.
Goodbye, chat. We will see you Wednesday. Adios.